So what do you guys want to talk about today? Still principles? Okay.
Rani, you want to start?
Yep, so question, start with Rani. Rani's been starting myself the last few weeks. Microphone.
I've been thinking about like God's morality.
Yep.
And wondering if it's different to like learning about the spiritual principles or if they're similar.
Well, if we define God's morality, what is that really?
It's how God would like you to treat yourself and others.
Yes, so it's specifically relating to the human soul, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's really about how God feels about the human soul, isn't it? And how he designed the human soul to operate. So you could say God's morality is the same as saying God's truth about how God designed the human soul to operate and to get the best out of it. For you to get the best out of your own soul, couldn't you? So you could also say it's God's laws governing the human soul is also God's morality. So those three statements I've just made all mean the same thing. Does that make sense, Rani?
Yes.
So when we talk about God's laws associated with the human soul, then we're really talking about God's morality, because all of those laws govern how that human soul should interact with its environment and also with other souls. Yeah. And so whenever we mention God's truth or God's laws about the human soul or that govern the human soul, we're really talking about God's morality that God set up and designed for the human soul to work the best. That's how the human soul operates the best, is living in harmony with those laws.
And it's really how to get the best out of other souls as well as your own soul, isn't it?
Yeah, all souls, obviously.
Yeah. So your treatment of other souls as well.
Is going to get the best out of others.
If you do it
if you treat them lovingly.
Yeah.
Even if they treat you unlovingly. How you treat them is going to get the best out of them, even if they are unloving.
Like love creates
is that going over
opportunity.
your head,
Yeah,
a little bit.
Love creates opportunity. If you think about it, like when we met you, there was things in you that were not loving, weren't there?
Yep.
Yeah. Still working on them.
Yeah.
But some of them have changed, haven't they? Yeah. So love, treating
What
you in
caused that
harmony.
change?
Yeah. What was it? Yeah, if you think about
You guys, really.
But what about us?
Well, not us.
It wasn't us. It
Like,
wasn't.
we played a part in it by teaching you some truths.
Yeah.
But what did you do?
Well, I try to work through them
So be more specific.
and probably get God's truth on it and
So you had to put forward an effort, a
Yeah.
sincere effort of your own, didn't you?
Yeah.
And in that process, you started to try to bring your life into more harmony with God's laws.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're bringing your life into more harmony with God's morality. Right? It's the same, saying the same thing. And in the process of doing that, you benefit.
And can you see that by us treating you in harmony with God's morality, it created an opportunity for you to learn about God's morality?
Yeah.
So if we treated you really badly right from the beginning, what would have happened then?
Probably would have got angry.
That's right. It would have been worse, wouldn't it? Oftentimes the outcome is worse. So if the person hasn't yet to determine for themselves that they are going to live in harmony with God's truth, or you could say it another way, live in harmony with God's morality, until the person determines that for themselves, you could say the persons who interact with the person who's yet to make the decision, a lot depends on whether they are going to be morally in harmony with God or not, as to how the response will be. If the person who's talking to you has a poor connection with God's morality, then of course there's no positive influence they can bring to bear to help you become a more moral person. But if the person talking to you is connected with God's morality and wants to practice God's morality, God's truth, God's laws, then of course when they interact with you, it now creates a potential, doesn't it, for you then to respond to the same morality that they are living by.
That's why it's so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
Yep. Now that was very quiet. I can hardly hear it.
Yeah, I
on this
can't,
side.
that's right,
Me?
maybe, yeah.
Yeah, you need to talk a bit louder, aren't you?
Yeah.
We just got to. We want to leave the aircon on because.
Can I turn the fan down? Do you think that'll help? Or
Well,
turn
it just
on
means it's going
silent?
to get warm. That's all.
Oh, yeah.
You can turn it down, but anyway.
Just put it on silent.
No, that doesn't help.
Okay.
I found what helps is dropping the fan speed to there. Yell out if it gets too warm up there.
Yeah, and in the breaks
We'll turn it back
flush
up.
it, yeah.
Okay. Does that make sense to you though, Randy? The beauty of somebody living in harmony with God's morality themselves is that every person they interact with gets an example of what it's like to interact in a manner that's in harmony with God's morality. In that process of getting that example, you then, the person who's on the receiving end of that treatment, have now an example of what it's like to live in harmony with that morality, so therefore live in harmony with love. And that then could cause you to make a different choice, even though you might, at the beginning, have not been considering making a different choice.
Of course, God's principles are very involved in God's morality because they, love, truth, all of those matters are related.
Yeah.
But God's morality is specifically about the treatment.
Yeah.
of
So you could say
self.
God's morality is the definition of another way of saying it would be God's principles about how you treat others and the environment and how you treat yourself. You could say that's also God's morality, but it's the same as saying God's principles. And remember last week we said God's principles are an expression of God's personality. So you could say what God likes you doing versus what God doesn't like you doing. Couldn't you? It's another way of saying it. What does God like us doing with each other and with the environment? And what doesn't he like us doing? Because he has defined through his law what he likes. Yeah. And also the best possible loving design as to what he designed us is also an expression of what he likes. So he designed you, for example, to have desires. He likes that. So when you suppress your desires, he doesn't like that. So that's another way. Another way you could say that is God's morality is that you must express your desires. That's another way of saying what I just said earlier. Right? So, there's a lot of ways, different ways you could say things in terms of how to define things. But the main thing is to always take it back to what does God like and what God doesn't like. And that's an expression of his personality. And also he designed all of his laws in harmony with what he likes. And so therefore, when you're against the law, you're also against what God likes. So you're setting yourself up as an enemy of God, aren't you then? Really? When you're out of harmony with his law. Can you understand what I mean by that? As an enemy of God? You're basically saying, I don't like what God likes. So now the two of you, God and you, will be in disharmony. Because you don't like what he likes. And he gives you the choice to make that decision. You're allowed to make that decision if you want. But it means you're not going to have a relationship with God by making that decision. The person who receives God's love to the point where they like everything God likes. And they don't like everything God doesn't like. And God doesn't like some things. As you can well feel when you're connected with God, you will soon feel what he doesn't like, as well as what he does like. And this is why a lot of people don't want to connect to God, because they don't want to feel from God what God doesn't like. So when they do something of their own that God doesn't like, they don't want to feel the feeling they get from God about not liking it. So they just ignore God altogether. So you can tune into things and find out what God doesn't like, as well as what God likes. And I should say loves, because God is not passive. So like for God is not even existent as an emotion. He loves things or he doesn't love them. There's no like. It's like, there's only love. Right? So with things that God loves, he really loves, and the things that he doesn't love, he really doesn't love. Yeah. And there's no sort of halfway in that regard. Which is eventually what you'll be like. The more you connect to God, the more you'll have some very definite feelings about what is wrong and how you feel about what is wrong versus also what is right and how you feel about what is right. So you can say morality, which is the decision about what is right and what is wrong. If you're talking about God's morality, it's God's feelings of what is right and what is wrong. Which is very different to our own, aren't they? Yeah. And the key is, if you want to be close to God, of course you can receive some of God's love to the point where now you're making decisions about what is right and what is wrong, and you can still make a decision, even after receiving some of God's love, you can make a decision that you don't agree with God about what he thinks is right, or don't agree with God about what he thinks is wrong, but that's going to stop you from receiving more love. Because now you're in direct disharmony. You could basically say you're in a battle with God about what is right and wrong. I'm going to ask more, Ronnie. Got to keep that mic in.
It was more just a comment of, I've experienced that, of not doing what God feels is right, and the pain of that, and then that fight in that battle of my own opinion versus God's.
Yeah, but there's a difference between feeling your own pain about doing something that's out of harmony with God's morality, which is a normal consequence of the law, versus feeling God's feelings about what you've done, which are far more intense actually than the consequences of the law.
I don't think I've experienced that.
See, the average person doesn't want to experience that. And that's why many people don't want a relationship with God on that basis. They don't want to feel how strongly God feels about things. So frequently they're willing to take the consequence of the law, and the consequence of breaking the law is the pain and suffering that comes along with the consequence of breaking the law. You could say the compensatory effect of breaking the law. But that's not the same as feeling God's emotion about you breaking the law, because that's a lot more intense when you feel God's emotion about breaking the law. You remember in the recent tour we did in England, we had a discussion with the young men in the Damerham in England, and Errol, Mary channeled Errol, and you remember that I encouraged him to feel God's feelings about what he was doing versus what he was doing. And when he started to feel God's feelings about what he was doing, can you remember his response? It was like he had an intense, almost like a breakdown, feeling what God felt about what he was doing versus just feeling about what he felt about what he was doing. Right? And that's the power of feeling God's feelings, is that you can feel how intensely God feels about things. And that can help you appreciate greatly how strongly God feels, both on the positive, when you do a positive thing, but also when you do a negative thing, how strongly God feels against that. It's very important. When you have a relationship with God, you can feel those two things, and it makes it a lot easier to make wise decisions and choices when you can feel those two things. So that's beyond the feelings of compensation which occur because you broke the law.
Yeah, I don't think I've experienced that.
No, most people don't. Most people are not connected strongly enough to God to feel the intensity of God's feelings about them breaking the law. Yeah. And it's interesting because, it's also an indication that most people are not as connected to God as they believe themselves to be. So there's a lot of people who believe themselves to have received God's love, but the indication is if they can't feel God's emotions, the intensity of God's emotions about how God feels about you breaking a law, then of course you really haven't got a connection with God very strongly yet at all. That makes sense? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. We come to Nina, and then we'll work our way to Ulf, and then...
So we did talk about how that affects repentance, compensation, say, versus feeling God's feelings.
Yes, well, you could say, if you think about compensation, the role of compensation is to bring you into harmony with the law, but it's through your own pain and suffering. In other words, I feel too much pain now, so I've got to stop doing what was wrong. Do you understand that feeling? Yeah. So you might be doing something that's wrong, and then you get to the stage where you're sensitive enough to feel your feelings about the compensation about it. And oftentimes people don't even get to be sensitive about it at all. What they do for a period of time is they do the wrong thing for a period of time, and every time you do a wrong thing, there is a compensatory effect that it begins upon your soul when you do something wrong. But the average person detunes a bit more from their feelings, and so they continue doing it wrong, and the feelings intensify, but they detune a bit more from their feelings. Do you understand? So this is what happens over the course of their life. They start with a certain level of feelings. In your first instance, when you're first born, you have very intense feelings about everything that's wrong. That's why most babies cry a lot, because you're arriving on earth. You were conceived in a 6th sphere condition. You arrived on earth generally in a 5th sphere condition, and already everyone else around you is in a 1st sphere condition. So you're already feeling the difference between a 5th sphere condition and a 1st sphere condition, and it feels pretty bad. And so a normal child will be crying quite a lot. But then as time goes on through whatever they've been taught to do with shutting down those feelings, they shut down some feelings. And so now they're in a 4th sphere condition, and they shut down some more feelings, and they shut down some more feelings. And now they're in the 1st sphere condition, and now by the time they're an adult, they're still choosing to do things wrong. So they're still going down in their condition, but they're also desensitizing their emotions to that condition. So the net result is the average person is desensitizing and desensitizing to the compensatory effects of feeling how bad things are, to the point where their life becomes worse than the life of the people around them. Do you understand what I mean by that? So in other words, you get to this point, usually, and this is without any self-awareness, you get to this point where your life, you recognise that your life isn't going seemingly as smoothly, as swimmingly, as the people around you. It's going for the people around you. And so you're starting to be more conscious of your pain, but you're still in a very desensitised emotional state, right? Because you could have been conscious of this much pain, but you're only conscious of this much pain. But there is that much pain inside. The difference between the 6th sphere and the 1st sphere condition is the level of pain you're in, but you're only feeling the difference between the average person and where you are, right? Which is a very small bit. So when a person starts feeling that, then they start generally becoming conscious of their pain. Once they become conscious of their pain, they start going, well, maybe I need to do something different. Because I'm now aware that I'm in some pain, and I'm becoming aware of what that pain is, so maybe I should do something different now, because, obviously whatever I've done has led me to this point. So the average person who begins the process of awakening is right at this point in the 1st sphere, generally, and it's not in the middle of the 1st sphere either. Usually it's sort of a hellish state of the 1st sphere. And you're in that state where you go, we're starting to become sensitive to your pain, because now the pain is so great, it's very hard for anybody to detune from it. Now, many people do this in old age, so you get old, you get broken bones and things not working so well anymore, the pain increases, the intensity of the pain increases, so the awareness increases, and as the awareness increases, you start realising, there must be things wrong that I'm doing to get into this state. My body's not recovering the way it used to, and all those kind of things. And so you become a bit more conscious, and this is where some people, not all, but some, make some decisions about changing their lifestyle and, doing less violent or less immoral, sexually, emotionally immoral things, and to try to manage their pain levels, fundamentally. So you get to this stage in that place where you're fundamentally just changing because you're managing your pain.
Yeah, and you said last week that that's not a loving motivation at all.
Not, is it? It's a selfish motivation, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it indicates a terrible debility when it comes to sincerity. It means that you haven't got any sincerity, and all you're interested in is alleviating your own pain. So therefore, it means you're not really caring about whether what you do is loving or unloving to others. It's more, how's my life being affected? So the average person gets to that state, right, where they start feeling their own pain and suffering, and they recognise, like, the pain and suffering they're in. We'll just pause for a moment.
You're right, babe.
And if we got a seat to be, yeah, up the back. Yes. Right, so we're in this state where we've sort of come from that sixth-sphere condition when we were conceived. We're now down in the first sphere condition through the choices we've made that are out of harmony with love, where we've broken the law. In other words, we've broken God's morality. The way God designed the soul to operate has been broken. And the law has meant that there is an increasing amount of pain, but we've also increased our desensitisation to it, to the point where it becomes quite obvious we're in the pain and we can't even avoid it anymore physically. Usually that's what happens. Usually a person sort of ignores their emotional pain to a larger degree until it gets to the point where now I'm in physical pain or even intense physical pain, and now I can't really ignore it anymore. So what do I do? Now the average person then goes, well, I need to do something, so I need to find out what's causing my pain. Usually they just focus on the physical, don't they? Try to fix their physical pain, not understanding it's spiritual pain that causes all the physical pain. So the average person doesn't even look at their principles at this point. They're just looking at, how do I make my life less painful? So still very selfishly motivated, not driven by principles at this stage at all. And for many, that's how they die.
For most.
In pain, emotional pain that they've ignored most of their life, and in intense physical pain. Many die in intense physical pain. They pass, they're still in intense physical pain. There's a general belief on earth that after you die, your pain ends. Nothing could be further from the truth, fortunately. So the general person believes when you die, you have no pain after that. Not true. In fact, what happens is after you've lost a physical body, the sensitivity to the pain increases.
Which is actually a really loving provision.
Which is a loving provision, yeah. If it didn't happen,
You wouldn't learn.
your people in the spirit world wouldn't change either. Yeah. So your sensitivity to the pain increases, and that's what generally causes the average person to begin change, is the sensitivity to their own pain. Right? But none of that is principles.
Or repentance.
Or repentance. All of that is just the law of compensation at work. Right? To enter repentance is a state of desire. And it's a desire to uphold the principle and to be sorrowful, or, to deal with the, you could say, the guilt of not having upheld the principle in the past. That's repentance.
And you could say it's seeking God's feelings about what you've done. You want to know God's feelings rather than just wanting to get out of the compensatory pain. You're like, well, I want to know God's feelings.
Yeah.
And that's when you have the chance of feeling them. Yeah.
Now, wanting to know God's feelings at the very beginning of that, generally you're going to feel that God, and you remember, many of you, when you're in that state, you get to be in a first sphere state before this happens. And so wanting to know God's feelings when you're in a first sphere state is pretty tricky, because God's feelings about where you are pretty intense. And they're pretty intensely, condemnatory as well. And when I say condemnatory, the reason why the law of compensation is like it is because God has some feelings about you treating other people badly, and about you treating you badly, and about you treating the environment badly, and when you start feeling those feelings, you recognise, wow, God has some intense feelings about me and my behaviour. And the average person in that place doesn't want to feel those feelings. So they're still not repentant yet, because they don't want to feel. Remember I said repentance is a desire to feel what God's principles are, right, about what you've done. If I don't want to feel what God's feelings are, then I don't want to feel what God's principles are. Because God's feelings are an expression of his principles.
And there's no way you can be repentant at that point.
Correct.
It's just
So you're still in conversation,
yeah.
and you're still going to be beaten by the law until, and for many, they're beaten by the law only until they reach the sixth gear. So never connect to God, never connect to God's feelings about how God feels about anything they've done. They just connect to their feelings about what they've done, and all of those feelings are going to be quite bad, but nothing in comparison to the intensity of God's feelings about what you've done.
So as just thinking it through logically,
Mm-hmm.
as you become more aware that you've done the wrong thing,
Yep.
that prepares you for being able to receive more fully how God might feel about what you've done.
Yeah, you could say it does prepare you, but at some point you're going to need to develop a desire to feel what God feels about it.
And just let it hit you.
Sorry?
Just let it hit you.
Yeah, let it hit you and respond. If you let it hit you, you'll probably cry a lot. In the process of crying, you will release the grief associated with what you've done. And also, you give God, if you pray during that phase, you give God the opportunity to help you with the cause of why you did it. Right? And the release of the cause occurs during that phase as well. But if you are not prepared to feel God's feelings, none of that will occur. So in other words, you won't receive God's love, and therefore you will not have the effect of forgiveness from God specifically. You'll have to go through forgetfulness of the law, which is the process of compensation.
It's kind of neat.
It's very neat, yeah. Tidy, like everything does.
Oh, I've forgotten the question.
Yeah. Can you see the repentance process is not being pummeled into submission? The
No.
repentance process is desiring to submit.
I'm an
to the
active
law.
participant.
And,
I
and
want to.
respectful of your free will and...
Well, it's only driven by your free will,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
I remember the question, receiving God's feelings on the sins that you've committed. You talked about the removal of the cause.
Yes.
Is that something we have to ask for? Like,
Well, you
really
probably want to.
desire that as well.
Once you feel God's feelings about what you've done, you generally would want to feel also forgiven for what you've done. And so that is usually the time the average person would ask God for forgiveness, which is the time they'll receive God's love, and the cause will be addressed. The cause of why you sinned would be addressed as well in that phase. If you're not going to do that, then of course you need to address the cause through the compensatory process. And reparation will occur whether you address the cause or God does. So the reparation part of compensation will always be done no matter what path you're on, because you want to repair the damage of what you've done. It makes sense, wouldn't it? If you were truly repentant, you would want to repair the damage of what you've done, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So that reparation part of the phase of a compensation will always occur whether you've received God's love and the cause has been addressed by God, or you've had to address the cause yourself. Either way, repairing the damage of what you've done is a necessity, is a requirement. Yeah. And when I say a requirement, a person who's in harmony with God's love and feels God's feelings, they would feel they want to do that. The person who's not in harmony with God's love or God's feelings is the compensation process continues until you finish up willing to do it. So, yeah. There's actually compensation where you break the compensation laws if you're unwilling to repair. So the average person says, I want to you know, they go up to someone who they've hurt and they, can you forgive me please? And when the person says, oh, you're forgiven, they go, oh, that's all done now. The person, you know, the person who's asked for forgiveness thinks it's all done. No, it's not. You see, from God's perspective, it's not, even the desire for forgiveness isn't sincere until you want to repair the damage with the person.
Yeah, that sort of desire for forgiveness is really almost a desire to let yourself off the hook.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not true forgiveness and not true repentance when somebody says, oh, I've forgiven you, either, you know, not true repentance for me to ask Mary to forgive me, let's say, when I'm unprepared to repair the damage of what I did to Mary. Make sense? Yeah. Same applies with the environment, and this is why we're asking many of you Saturday mornings to do some work out in the environment, because we will not see whether you're repentant until your attitude to that work changes to the point where you want to do it. Until then, you're not repentant for what you've done to the environment. And many of you know that you're not happy about doing it, right? So therefore you are demonstrating in that process you're not happy. You're not happy to repair the environment. You're happy to damage it, and you say that you want to stop, and you say you want to stop damaging it any further, but when it comes to doing the work to repair it, very few people actually want to do that. And what we notice is many of you don't do it in your own places either, right? In the way God would want you to do it. You do it the way you want to do it, but not the way God wants you to do it. But God wants the natural environment back, right? God wants all the, you know, the native creatures back. Many of us go, well, I don't like the natural environment that much, so I want my environment back. You know, like,
I'm going to plant roses.
I'm going to plant all these pretty flowers, but none of which feed the animals, or you know, so that, you know, a person in true repentance doesn't do that with the environment. They'd be happy to repair the environment, and then on top of that, happy to create an environment which benefits all creatures, not just themselves. So often people show us their gardens, you go, yeah, it's not a bad garden, but actually, when you look at it from God's perspective, it's a terrible garden. In the sense that it's not a bad garden compared to other people's on the earth, maybe, but in comparison to what God wants, because God wants all the native creatures to benefit from your garden, not just you to benefit, is indicative of true repentance hasn't happened yet. So it's just an example of it. But you can see it a lot in relationships where you want somebody, you know you've hurt somebody, you want somebody to forgive you, but then you're not prepared to do the reparation required to repair the damage of what you did to the relationship, you know. And that indicates that you're truly not repentant anyway.
So, would it be fair to say that another benefit of getting God's feelings on the sin that you've committed and feeling that repentance will also help you to know what you need to do then to fix it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Because you feel what
Makes
God
sense.
wants to be. You feel what God defines as a good thing. So you feel God's feelings about what is good, and therefore you feel what God defines as a good thing. And then you realise, oh, I'm off the mark. Because I don't think that's a good thing.
And if you're sincere, you'd feel excited about actually doing that.
Not always, because you might have sin in you that causes you to be in disagreement.
Right.
So not always excited. Of course, when you're one with God, after then you'll get excited.
Okay.
But not before then. You probably have pain to deal with, and a lot of people are not that excited about dealing with their pain. Isn't that how it was? Isn't that how it is for you? Not that excited about it. But you get to a stage where you start realising, the more I deal with my pain, and the more that I'm proactive about it, you exercising desire, I'll have a closer relationship with God, I'll benefit from that relationship faster, but also I'll be in a state of love for myself, you know, which means that I'm going to enjoy things better. And so you end up realising that even pain is a worthwhile, going through it is a worthwhile experience because of what it brings you afterwards. Yeah. The release of your suffering and also the release of your sin, and therefore in a better state of love, therefore a happier state. That's what it's going to bring you. But it's afterwards. What a lot of people want is they recognise they're in pain or whatever, but they want a new state, like a painless state to be, without going through any emotional pain. And it's just not possible. Not possible to do that, ever.
Effort will be required on our part.
Yeah, and not just effort, but desire, eventually, is going to be required. Because that's how God designed the soul. Things change when you exercise a desire to change. That's the only time things change.
And you sort of started off the talk by saying it's almost, okay, another question then. It's almost a sin then, really, isn't it, not to have a desire?
Oh, it's definitely a sin.
From God's perspective.
It's a sin against your own soul, but it's also a sin against some other universal laws governing the interaction of souls with their environment. Yeah, it's definitely a sin not having desires. So these religions that, like the Buddhist faith, has a tendency to suggest, and and a lot of Eastern philosophies do, have this tendency to suggest that you get rid of your desires and that's how you reach perfection. Well, it's directly against some of the fundamental principles, fundamental laws about how God designed the human soul. Yeah.
Thank you.
God's not up there going, I'm in nirvana, having no desires. If God had no desires, would he have ever created you? He wouldn't have really. To have a child, you have to have a desire to have them, don't you? So, God would never have even created you if God was in that state. Yeah. So this whole concept that being at one with God is becoming desireless is completely against the law about how the soul is being designed, and therefore completely against God's principles, completely against God's personality.
So you would in fact be degrading your condition
by suppressing your desires. And many of you know this already, right? And every time you suppress your desires, do you feel better or worse afterwards? It's always worse, right? So you already know that to a degree. You just haven't applied it to God's, the principles about God and God's nature and how God designed you to be, Yeah, you break that one law of desire in your soul, you're going to cause lots of problems for yourself in your future. Yeah. Not only that, you have a tendency then to accept the sins of others as well as the sins of yourself when you're in a state of being desireless. Right? Can you see why that's the case? Why you being desireless?
You're giving up your morality. That would be, you're giving up your desire to act principally, so therefore...
But also your desire to receive love from others. You're giving that up too, aren't you? Can you see that? If you give up desire, you're also giving... Like if I give up desire, inside of me there's a desire for Mary, but also there's a desire to receive things from Mary. Can you see there's both desires? And if I give up desire, I'm giving up the desire for her, which is an expression of my love for her, but I'm also giving up the desire to receive love from her. Can you see that? By giving up my desires, I'm giving up both sides of the equation, aren't I? And this is what many of you have done with regard to relationships. This is why many of you are alone. Because you've actually given up the desire to receive. You've been hurt in the past, and instead of feeling that hurt, you've given up the desire to receive, right? And in the process of giving up the desire to receive, you've numbed to your desires to receive. In other words, you start to live a life where you're not looking to have relationships that are beneficial to both of you and the other party. And so what you do is you start detuning from what others are willing to give you or desiring to give you, right? So there's a lot of problems with the lack of desire to give and the lack of desire to receive. You understand?
Mm.
So some of you have money issues you've got to address. Well, partly some of them are because you have a lack of desire to give of yourself and everything. But some of you have a lack of desire to receive from others too. For lots of reasons, like you think if you receive something from them, then you owe them something. Or if you receive something from them that you're not really worthy to receive it, you know, so you feel bad about yourself and you don't want to feel bad about yourself. And so it's the desire to receive and the desire to give that needs to be addressed when we're talking about desire. So desire, having no desire, breaks God's laws, fundamental laws about how the human soul was created. Remember, desire is also an aspect of faith. So in other words, you have no faith now either. Because faith produces desire. So if there's no desire, then there mustn't be any faith driving the desire. So in other words, you no longer live by the principle of faith anymore when you have no desires. And you have no desire anymore. And that desire will be impacted in terms of the desire to give as well as the desire to receive.
Yeah.
And so you end up living an alone life. Which is where you are, right? Living an alone life.
Oh, not so much these days.
Not so much these days.
No.
Well, on the
No.
romantic side of things, this happens a lot with people, isn't it?
Yeah, no romantic side.
That's right. And so it's the romantic area of life that has created the most hurt when it comes to your desire in the past. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
And this is why you detune from it, so there is no romance in your life now.
Mm.
You follow? But the romantic aspect of it is a major area of desire, because without it, you're basically every relationship you have without romance, when there's no one romantic relationship in your life, you're missing a big portion of how your soul's been designed, because fundamentally you're detuning from the other half of your soul. So you're only ever going to be a half under those circumstances of a person. Now, being a half of a person is very different than being a whole one, right? But most of us get to this stage where we've had hurt, romantic hurt in the past, so we get to the stage where we've detuned from that desire, the desire to give or receive in that regard, right? And then once you detune from that desire, a large portion of your happiness is now never going to happen. And you can see why God designed that to be the primary, aside from the relationship with God, that is going to be, your relationship with the other half of yourself is going to be the primary source of happiness. God designed it for that to be that way. So if you detune from the desire to give and receive romantically, you're breaking a lot of laws with regard to how the soul works. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the average person sort of goes, but you know, that's not a big part of my life anymore, you know. That's not that important compared to me loving others and all that. Nothing could be further from the truth. Like, it's the most important thing from God's perspective about your soul.
Yeah, I've got a lot more work to do there for sure.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is why the average person doesn't meet their soulmates until they're in the fifth sphere, because there's a lot of work to do to get to the point where you've dealt with the hurt romantically that you've experienced in the past, and to the point where you are desiring to give as well as desiring to receive, no matter how another person treats you.
Yeah, I'm still in that place where I struggle to feel like I'm just a half. You know, Yeah.
Well, you know, this is a part of the numbing down.
Yeah.
The numbing down gets you to the stage where you become so numb to the other half that you now think you're an individual without the other half. Right? And this is where most people on earth get to that stage, where they now believe themselves to be an individual without there being another half. Yeah. And that's because they've become desensitized to their feelings. Because you can only do that by desensitizing to the feelings. Make sense? And every time you desensitize to your feelings, and particularly your romantic feelings, you are desensitizing from your soul, not exercising desire, not exercising faith. So you're in a lot of disharmony with a lot of God's principles. So naturally, there's going to be consequences that are sad as a result of being in disharmony with so many principles.
I want to pray about that now.
Yeah, most people, most people who have listened to Divine Truth ever since we began teaching it, don't understand what I just said about the romantic part of your life. The average person treats the romantic part of their life as quite unimportant, really. Yeah.
All very mercenary,
Yeah.
very barter-based.
Most of your addictions are in the romantic part of your life as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that. That was good. That's good chat. Yeah.
Very important thing to work through, because if you don't, you'll get to the stage where, you become so numb to romance that it's going to take years in the spirit world for you to open up again to romance, Yeah. Tris? If we come down to Ulf on this one.
So, demand for receiving or giving in a relationship is not the same as desire.
No.
It can't be.
No, it's addiction if it's a demand, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's not what I'm talking about
Yeah.
when I'm talking about romance. Romance is a desire to give
Yep.
of yourself to another,
Yeah.
and that means your heart, your feelings, your thoughts, your intentions, your actions, but also the desire without the demand to receive from the other.
Yeah.
Right. But when the other doesn't give it, you wouldn't be angry, you
Yeah.
wouldn't be bitter and twisted, and you wouldn't say that's enough now.
As soon as any bitter and twisted, you're straight away, it's not a desire.
Correct. It's a demand or addiction that is not getting met, and you need to address that. Yeah. And it does take time to address those things, even in a relationship. You can enter a relationship often at the beginning thinking that in harmony, that I'm in harmony with the principle because I'm now having a relationship. But actually, as soon as the other person doesn't give you what you think you wanted,
Yep.
how do you feel about it then? Now, if you still feel happy to give and happy and still desirous to receive but not angry about not receiving, then that indicates you're getting closer to God's feelings about the matter, right? But the average person is not there. The average person goes, "You're not giving me what I want now. We're in an agreement. This is why I got a certificate saying I'm married to you. It's because this marriage thing is a contract."
Yeah.
So that's the same thing as so the addiction started to desensitize myself to the pain of romantic history that's been happening. All the history of my mother or history of that.
Correct. That also is true.
That's the stuff that's getting in the way from that then.
Correct. Yeah.
That's where that comes from, it's not a nice desire.
Yeah, so a lot of people find in their, firstly they've had the damage with the opposite gender parent if they have, and the same gender parent can also cause damage. So you've got the parental damage, which affects me, which then causes me to have a view of my potential future partners, of what I should get from them versus what I should give to them, which is all tainting this, view of desire to love my partner and not have a role with my partner. So that all needs to be sorted. But then there's also, when you become a teenager, generally you entered romantic relationships. Most of them were quite selfish. Whenever they didn't meet your needs anymore, most of them stopped. And that's because they were quite selfish. And the other person probably was also quite selfish, so you felt quite hurt about, the relationship stopping generally. And these hurts add up over the course of your life. And most people, because the romantic hurts are the largest hurts, generally, that a person will feel their entire life. Because they are the largest hurts, they are also the hurts that the average person tries to suppress the most and desensitize to the most. And because of that, they're acting out of harmony with soul with regard to the romantic relationship, out of harmony with the design of the soul with regard to the romantic relationship. And so as a result of that, they're going to have more numbness. They're going to have to numb down to deal with that level of hurt. Right? So there's the hurt of the parents, and then there's what happens when you're in addiction in a relationship and the hurt that causes. And then the two hurts get added together, and that causes the average person to shut down emotionally with regard to romance in particular. to the point where they hardly have a romantic feeling for anybody anymore.
Or they double down on the addictions to keep those past feelings at bay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that usually just intensifies the pain, and so after a while they learn not to do that either. And this, of course, is out of harmony with the principle of desire, of how the principle of desire works in the soul. Whenever you're out of harmony with that principle, you're going to be out of harmony with a large way of the way God created your soul, to work. So when you start detuning from desires, and particularly from romantic ones, you really start tuning out of your life a lot, like in many, many different ways.
But you're right, Trish, you have to be really honest about, is this a desire for an addiction, or is it a desire to love and receive love?
Yeah.
Because we're pretty slippery in our addictions.
Yeah. The average person has the addictions that are caused from the injuries with their mother or father, and then they act upon those addictions in the relationship with their partner, right? And then on top of that, during their development, puberty, they develop their sexual addictions, which are added then to the addictions that they learnt from their mother and father. And then they act in those sexual and emotional addictions with their partner, which then causes hurt to both parties, usually in the relationship. And then that hurt is generally detuned from as much as possible, because it's the biggest hurts that you can experience. And then as a result of that, the person numbs themselves down like in major ways, which then causes a numbness of all sorts of other areas of your life as well. It also causes a rage to increase over time, to the point where you're acting out in rage towards every person of the gender you're interested in. So if you've got a heterosexual interest, you're acting out towards the opposite gender all the time, or if you've got a homosexual interest, acting out towards the same gender all the time. And these things then just cause more hurt, and which you detune from more. And so by the time a person passes, generally they are so detuned when it comes to all of their romantic soulmate feelings. Yeah. Sad, eh? Yeah. Because God designed that relationship to be the primary relationship other than your relationship with God. You could say the relationship with your soulmate is not even a relationship, because you're two halves of the same person. That's not a relationship. That's a design issue. You're acting out of harmony with the design. The design is you are one whole, and you're now trying to create two halves when God said no, you're one whole. So it's not a relationship you're breaking up. It's actually a design.
You're trying to break the design.
You're trying to break the design. It's like getting out a hammer. It's like designing a car, getting out a hammer and trying to bash it at bits with a hammer, rather than keeping it intact. That's the kind of attitude the average person has towards their soulmate relationship. It's like getting out a sledgehammer and seeing how far they can go, like in terms of damaging the relationship. Yeah. And so by the time most people pass, the soulmate relationship is like, well, it's usually non-existent. Usually. Yeah. So,
I have a question about feeling God's feelings about my desires and actions.
Can we just for the moment, is there any more questions about the subject about soulmates, desires?
Relationship.
Yep, so if you come down to Arch down the front.
And do you want to go to the back?
Yeah.
So in the soulmate relationship, how detune over time? How do you re-tune to that?
Well, it's like any time you detune, Arch, so you have to get to the stage where you're willing to feel the past pain in order to start reconnecting yourself again to your feelings. So the detunement is caused because you're numbing to your painful feelings. So what happens with the romantic relationships, for example? The average person has one, and then they numb to the pain in that relationship, and so they're numbing towards their feelings that are basically about romance, and they're numbing towards those feelings. And so what you're going to have to do is the opposite of that. You're going to have to open up to the feelings of the past, So in the case of yourself, obviously a lot of them are to do with the relationship with your mum and dad, needs to be opened up to. For someone who's had some relationships, and you've had one already, haven't you? And then you open up to what was happening there, or what is happening there as well. And that's the way you open up to it. That makes sense? Yep, so we're up at...
Mine was the same question.
No worries. And you can keep that one off and we'll get to your subject in a minute.
This makes quite a lot of sense what you're saying, because when I'm trying to talk to God,
Yep.
God straight away, like the feelings from God are about my previous relationships.
Yeah, how you treated women.
That's where God straight away
Yeah,
give me feelings about.
yeah,
And sometimes like I get overwhelmed by it and I feel it.
Yeah.
And it feels really bad.
yeah,
And then sometimes I feel like I get worried like I'm going to be punished, and so sometimes that feeling kicks in.
yeah,
And then it's like, and then it's just a big mess of, it feels like inside, it's just a big mess of what's really going on inside of me. And
Yeah.
because
So what's your question?
the question is like,
You keep wanting to share your feelings with everybody
yeah,
and not ask the question. So what's your question?
so the question is, do you need to release?
Can I just stop you for a sec? You're in addiction trying to share your feelings with everybody rather than asking the question.
Okay,
And this is partly what you do with partners, ironically.
okay.
You want them to feel all your feelings, but you don't ever ask them questions about their feelings. You understand? Yeah, but go on.
What, do you have to go through the blocks? So like if you're feeling like you're going to be punished or something like that before you feel God's feeling, or is it literally just like...
You see, the average person, when they start feeling God's feelings about something, which you haven't really done much of yet, to be honest, but the average person feels that God's punishing them with those feelings. But that's not true. That's just God's feelings about what you've done. That's it. He's not punishing you with them. He's just, he has his feelings about what you've done. And if you feel them, you'll greatly benefit by seeing how bad it is what you've done. Right?
Yeah.
But the average person doesn't want to feel bad about what they've done. They don't want to feel the pain of their own guilt. And I'm not talking about the type of guilt which says, I'll feel guilty when, somebody wants me to do something or any of that. I'm talking about real guilt where you've done something wrong. The average person doesn't want to feel the pain of having done something wrong. Right? And that's often what drives a person asking for repentance from somebody. So, oh Mary, I'm so sorry. It's just that they, oftentimes they don't want to then feel what I did to Mary, right? I just want her to forgive me for what I did, but I don't want to feel the pain of what I did. Now, God's requirement as a part of repentance is that you feel the pain of what you did, right? That pain will be the pain Mary felt. If it was me with Mary, that would be the pain Mary felt. I'm going to have to feel it. I'll then feel the pain of what I did. Right? The average person doesn't want to do that. Now, when God shares you God's feelings, God's trying to help you do that, right? The average person doesn't want to do that. And so they end up in a state of just turning it off. What you call your blocks, right, are really your denials, aren't they?
Mm.
They're your desire to deny what you've done. The sin of what you've done and how painful it is to others, as well as to yourself, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So really, if you have the desire, then you will feel God's feelings.
Yeah, you want to.
Yeah.
You want to, but also you want to feel what it felt like for the other person you hurt. How did they feel? You want to feel it. You want to go, wow, look at the hurt that I created by doing what I did. Yeah. And not where they say they're hurt. I'm not talking about that kind of, because that's what I would call manipulation. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the actual thing as God measures it to be, what you did. See, the beauty of connecting with God is that you're going to get God's measurement about it. When you try to connect with the other person, you're going to get their measurement about it, which is often very different to God's measurement. Like sometimes the person even wants you to do the wrong thing. You know, so if you connect to their measurement, that's not going to be a good thing. But you connect to God's measurement, it becomes very clear what you've done and how wrong it was and how it felt to the soul of the other person, not what they are conscious of feeling, but actually what they will have to feel at some point in the future from it. Yeah.
The challenge you face, Nick, is that you want to hold on to your image of yourself while repairing your issues with women. But the image of yourself is that I'm really a nice guy to
Which
women,
you're not.
and I've just made a few mistakes, have been a bit misguided.
Not true. You made a lot of mistakes.
Yep. Yep.
And you haven't been as unwitting in your harm of others as you
Not as innocent as you think.
would like to think. And so that's why you keep running into these problems, because you still want to hold on to this idea of yourself and you're trying to progress. And
Yeah. Not going to progress.
so if you want to call that a block, that's a block.
That's a block.
It's a
yes.
block to truth. And
But can you see it's an exercise of will? It's not really a block. Can you see
Again.
that, Nikki? It's like,
I can see it's an exercise of will because that's an addiction, right? Like that.
it's not just that. You don't want to go there. You're like,
you actively want to hold on to this idea. So when you sort of say blocks, it's like, oh, it's a block, it was put in me, it's something out of my control.
Sort of making out it's out of your control, yeah.
Yeah, but actually, it's part of this process is coming to terms with how you have developed your will and continue to want to use it in relation to your image of yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Big thing, big
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
To recognise that what you call your blocks are really the exercise of your will to continue your sin. It's not really a block. You could say a block is where other people exercised your will against you and then caused you to come to believe things. Well, that's more of a block.
The false beliefs and things.
Yeah. Which you still need to address, of course. But
When you say these things about, oh, I'm worried that God's going to punish me, a lot of times you're just worried about the depth of how much God is going to show you what's wrong.
Yeah.
And you think that's punishment because you've got a version
Yeah.
of yourself that is
Yeah.
not a great guy.
yeah, it's not punishment.
Yeah.
It's a due compensation for what you've committed. It's not the same as punishment.
Yeah.
Yeah, punishment would be, putting you in hell forever, that's punishment. Due compensation for what you've done, well, isn't that justice? It's like, you steal something from someone, surely justice would be to give it back as you stole it. Like, in the same condition as you stole it, or better.
Yeah.
That would be justice. And if you were really desirous, you might give them back twice of what you stole. If twice what you stole would indicate that you were not only sorry, but you're also sorry for all the things they could have done with what you stole over the time they didn't have what you stole. So, if you think about how we want to be, we want to get away with things. And we want to just be able to say, I'm sorry, and just get away with it after then, get away with the reparation, get away with the understanding even of what the damage was in terms of what was done, and then what it did to the rest of their choices and decisions. You see, every woman that have had a relationship with you, you didn't only damage them in your relationship, you damaged them for every other relationship they've had since. You understand?
Romantic or not.
Well, particularly romantic, which we said is the biggest pain, right? You've damaged them for every other relationship since. So just saying you're sorry for what you did is the full sorrow would be recognising not only what you did, but also how it caused them to act after you did it. That'd be the true sorrow, wouldn't it? That's the kind of stuff that God can show you that the average person doesn't want to see. The average person doesn't even want to see what they did, generally, let alone what it then caused the person to act in. So in other words, it's like, you treat a woman badly, it's going to tear down her self-esteem. It's going to make her feel like she deserves to be treated badly. She may be now attracted to other men who treat her even worse as a result of your treatment of her, right? She also may decide she doesn't even want a relationship at all, right? And that's all because of your treatment of her, right? And of course her inability to feel about it, she needs to deal with that, but it's also partly attributed, isn't it, to your,
Yep.
to what you did to her as well.
Because if we go back to Rani's question, you had the choice to treat her in harmony with God's morality, but you chose something different.
Yeah.
So that it's only just then, isn't it, that part of the effects of it are attributed to you.
Yeah.
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 So a lot of people then say, oh, that relationship was pretty bad, but and often to themselves, not to the other person. But very few people ever think of what kind of damage they did to the person and then what that person then chose to do as a result of the damage that you did to them.
And so you have to feel through all of that.
Yeah.
With,
Well,
yeah,
God will,
of course, yeah.
see, this is what can God's feelings. God has feelings about all that.
Yep.
Yeah. And this is the beauty of feeling God's feelings, is that you'll feel some of God's feelings about all that. And it will make you aware of all of that. The average person is not aware of that because they don't even think they're going to have to go through that. They don't even think they should have to go through that. But it's not true. It's like, it's very, very hard. Remember in the 2019 assistance group, we said, it's very hard for you to measure the full consequences of your own sin because the average person has no idea the flow-on effects of your sin in the moment. So in the moment you commit a sin, but the flow-on effects are vast. And often they keep multiplying like a ripple, like we talked about the principle of, dropping a pebble in the pond, and the ripple effect just goes out, and it goes out for a lot longer than it took for the initial wave of the pebble dropping in the pond, right? The initial event. You often see the ripple, and this is the thing with our life, we often see the ripple going on for the rest of our life. So of course God attributes a part of that ripple to you, the person who created it. Yeah? And it's very important to see that. Very important to even want to see that. Very important to want to understand that. And as you come to understand that, you will be more and more sensitive to how God feels about these things. Make sense?
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Yep, Jen? And then what we'll do after Jen's is we'll have a break, and then we'll come back to us.
So you start in a state of numbness, and for me you indicated insincerity. What?
Well, no, let's start. Remember when we first came to Earth, we incarnated in a six-sphere condition. So you actually started in a state of a large degree of sensitivity.
Sensitivity.
Is where you actually started. But over time, and usually by the time you hit 20s or 30s, 20 or 30 years old, you're now in a fairly strong state of detunement from sensitivity.
Yep. So then if we start from a place of sensitivity,
Yep.
does that then mean we can connect back to that sensitivity? And what's the what's the spark that can get you out of the choice of numbness, choice of insincerity?
Your desire to deal with your sin.
Sincerity.
Sincerity. Desire to deal with your sin.
So is that a conscious decision?
It's going to have to be, yeah. Yep.
So you go from this place, having received this great information, you walk out the door and you just commit to it.
Well,
you imagine
yes?
It's going to have to be an emotional thing.
it's not an intellectual decision though, Jen.
That's
You're
right.
going to have to work through the emotions that cause you
To not want to do it.
be insincere,
Yeah.
to want your sin.
Yeah. See, that the average person hears divine truth and doesn't want to deal with their feelings about it. Right? So they never feel the benefits of divine truth in their personal life. The only way you're going to feel the benefit is by actually wanting to address your sin, developing a desire to address your sin. Once you develop a desire to address your sin, you'll develop faith that you can address it, and you'll start working through your sin.
So that causes you to get on your knees and talk to God, yes?
Not
that the step?
necessarily, because there's plenty of people who have a desire to address their sin without involving God, Jen. So you could say your involvement of God in the process is a part of you becoming more and more aware that actually not only did you sin against others and not only did you create these problems, but also you broke your relationship with God in the process of creating these problems. And do you want that relationship? You know, do you want to have a relationship with God or not? So that's about desire for that relationship, not just a desire to address your sin. You're going to have to awaken to your sin in order to have that relationship, but at the end of the day, the two desires are going to be, to some degree, they're joined to some degree, but also to some degree they're independent, because you know you can have a desire to address your sin without having a desire for God. So
Many people do.
many people do.
Yeah.
Is there an inbuilt, I don't know what the words are, invisible understanding?
No,
No. You're always looking for this
you want a magical.
magic.
I
No.
would like to have magic, yes,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
so right, you're so right.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so,
Yeah, there's none, and this is, you know, anybody who tells you there is just lying to you. There is
Okay.
no inbuilt magical thing that's going to cause you to become more aware of what God's definition of love is, aside from your desire,
Yeah.
aside from your faith and your desire. Nothing else is going to lead you there. No one else can put you there. No one else can do it for you.
No one can magically change the direction of your will at the moment.
Yeah.
This is a process of altering your will. It's a very
That
powerful
you must
tool.
do for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yes.
No one else can alter your will for you.
It's this tool that's in your hands. It's gifted to you
mm,
at birth, and you are currently using it in a way to avoid dealing with your sin, to continue to sin, and
It's gifted you at incarnation.
Incarnation. Sorry. Yes. And you have developed it in a certain way, and altering the way you use that will is going to also have to be something that you develop,
Yeah.
something that you put effort into.
is it also about putting your faith in the wrong things?
Well, obviously you're going to have
To
to
avoid-
get rid of putting your faith in the wrong things, aren't you? Yeah. So obviously you're going to have to deal with your corrupt faith. So you've got to deal with that, as well as developing a faith in what is right. So you have to do both. But it's all driven by your will. Nobody else will do it for you. God will not do it for you. You can ask God to help, but God's not going to help you if you're unprepared to do it for yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to have to be your will that determines what happens here. And that's why receiving God's love is all about you developing your will to receive. So it's so important to understand the desire, passion that comes from within you to make the change. And as I said to you last weekend, you haven't had that desire or passion to change. You want some magical external force to magically make you change.
Yeah.
You don't want to make the personal decision to change, and actually have to go through changing yourself and changing all your attitudes and changing the way you feel about things and changing your desires, and you know. But you're going to have to do it if you really want to do have any real progress. Make sense?
Yes, it does make
Everyone
sense.
who has done that becomes extremely grateful to God that is a part of the process,
Yeah.
because they come to understand their own potential and the power of their will.
Yeah.
But when we're in a state of sin, we want to hand off the responsibility to somebody else.
Yeah.
So what is the very first step? Because,
Well, I already
No.
just said that.
Yeah.
Developing in yourself the desire to do it. And that nobody else can do it for you. You've got to do it for yourself. And it's interesting, you keep on asking the same question. You're not unlike your brother in that regard, right? You remember he was always asking the same questions when he came along, right? So it's like you keep on asking the same questions because you want a different answer, right? The answer is you're going to have to do it. You, Jen, you're going to have to do it for you, for yourself. And unless you do, nothing will change unless you do. Nothing else around you will change.
okay,
There is no magical solution. Now, of course, that also applies to you receiving God's love. That is something that you determine. God wants to give it already, You're the one who's determining how fast you receive it. You, your will, your desire, your expression of your passion and longing for God. That's from you. It has to be sincere. That's from you. Sincerity is from you. And unless you develop these qualities, no one else can do them for you. No one else can make you do them. No one else can provide them to you. No one else can gift them to you. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't do it. These are things that have to come from you.
I'm almost excited, honestly.
Well, you haven't been in the past, right?
No,
So,
you're right, I haven't.
Yeah, you've been
But
more
I-
demanding that somebody come along and save you
Or that you get to blame someone else for the state of
for the rest of your life.
Yeah, blaming's a big one.
Yeah. And these are all things you're going to have to let go of, right? And so it's very important to come to understand that this is all about you. Now, I do think it's exciting myself because it means that everything is under your control, not somebody else's. There's not some magical block that, has to be lifted by somebody else. It's you that have got your blocks and you have to lift them. There's not some magical thing that somebody else can do that you're waiting for. That you're saying, oh, if they would only do that, then I would get on my way. It's not like that at all. It's you. So while most people have a large degree of opposition to their own personal responsibility, at the end of the day, once you realise how good personal responsibility is, you then realise the power of it, which is, I am determining my future to a large degree. Now, of course, to determine your celestial future, you're going to have to involve God in that determination,
Absolutely.
right? But even then, it's going to be up to your will as to whether you do that. So fundamentally, this does boil down to you and what you choose to do. And so the average person who hears divine truth goes, well, if only I got taught better, or, if only Jesus could teach me better, if he could come up with some, magical way of just, and I know all of a sudden, or that kind of stuff. The average person initially goes, that would be better, but it's not better. It's not better. It's never going to be better to do that. What in the end is going to boil down to is you, your desire, which will produce, and your faith, which will produce your effort, which will produce results for you, and that's the only thing that's going to determine the outcome here. Now, you can see that for many people, that might be thousands of years down the track where they develop that desire, right? There are many people who heard divine truth in the first century when we taught it and still don't have a desire to do anything about it.
But it doesn't have to be thousands of years,
No.
does it?
No, it doesn't have to be 10 years, does it? It could be tomorrow or today, couldn't it? You could choose to do it now,
To start.
now, and to work through the lack of desire first and all your corrupt desires, which are your corrupt
I have a
faith,
real
right?
feeling of excitement for the
Yeah,
first time. It's real.
Yeah,
Even for the repentance process for people that are harmed, to start on that journey.
yeah.
I mean, I'm not degrading the pain or the pain I've caused or
No, but
that, all those negatives, but there's a
at some
real
point
excitement
you're going to
here.
have some faith that the
the
outcome's
penny's
going to
dropped.
be good. Don't you?
I'm sorry, I missed your last comment.
Well, at some point you're going to have the faith that the outcome will be good. If you really believe and are excited about the potential
Yes.
outcome, can you see that's going to motivate you, isn't it, to make the changes necessary? And remember, these changes are not intellectual. They're all going to have to be emotional. They're all going to have to be felt.
And the place you're in right now, Jen, is feeling quite inspired, but there is the necessity to develop your own aspiration, which is different from inspiration.
You were inspired 10 years ago,
Yeah,
but nothing
Okay.
happened in that time. So
and that's because there's this thing that we're talking about where you have to develop an internal engine, not just listening to truth and feeling inspired, but
Yeah.
an internal driver that's going to pull you through
Wow.
when you face sin or when there is pain or when
Yeah.
these things happen.
And when you're having to go through painful emotion, you need to have a really strong feeling that you want to do that, you know, so that you can get to the other side of that. That is all going to come from you. Nobody can nurse you through that. You know, there's a lot of people who would like to be nursed through it, but even if somebody did nurse you, you'd never get to the bottom of it. It's only when you do it yourself that you get to the bottom of things. Yeah. So it's very important to understand, you know, the effect of your will, Jen. Like, if you think about it, you heard divine truth, what, 16, 17, 18 years ago now? Yeah.
It's a long time.
It's a long time. And the first year or two, you were quite enthusiastic about hearing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And then what happened is we started to try to address some of the sin you commit.
Yes.
And you got angry.
Yes.
Which every person does.
And very fearful.
Yeah. Well, you say fearful, but that's just really anger.
Okay.
Most people who say they're afraid are really just angry, and they call it fear because it's more publicly acceptable to call it fear than call it anger.
Okay.
It's really
anger. Right.
Yeah, it's really, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Right, is really what it is.
There might be crappy consequences. Oh, I'm afraid, but really
I'm
it's
afraid
angry.
it's really, I'm angry about the potential consequences.
I'm not willing to face the potential
Okay.
So it's really anger.
changes.
Yep.
And the average person stays in anger for a long time, you know, and you've stayed in anger for a long time. So, but you remember back in the original, right back at the beginning, you were inspired, and now you're getting inspired again, but see, what's going to come up now is your anger again. And are you going to go through that? Are you going to work your way through your anger? Instead of treating your anger as if it's something that's valid, start treating it as if it's just an ant emotion. It's just me, you know, having my tantrum. So it's not valid. You know, I just need to go through my tantrum, whatever I need to do to get through my tantrum, which means facing some facts generally. To get through tantrums, you have to face some facts. And when I say face some facts, face some truths about what God feels about your tantrum. God feels tantrums are useless. It's like beating your head against a brick wall. You know, it doesn't hurt anyone but yourself in the end. Mind you, tantrums can hurt other people too, so I'm not saying they don't. But when you're in a tantrum, which you've been in now for, I would say, 15 years, right? You've been in a tantrum. Don't get anywhere in a tantrum. And you can stay in a tantrum another 30 and you won't get anywhere with it either. So at some point you've got to go, well, what's going to get me out of this tantrum? Facing some truth is going to get me out of this tantrum. You know, I'm going to have to come to terms. Another principle of God, truth. I'm going to have to get real honest with myself. Truth. I'm going to have to become truthful with myself. Get out of this tantrum so that instead of seeing this tantrum as real, I just see it as my protest against God to do the right thing. So it's my protest against doing the right thing is really what my tantrum is. And once you feel your tantrum and you get through your tantrum, then you'll be at a state where you'll be able to go, right, my desire will start to build then to actually be more loving and want to do it more lovingly. In other words, I want to feel my own stuff rather than having a tantrum with Mary or with God or with all of you about my stuff. You know, I'll just want to feel my stuff, and I'll get to the stage where I want to know about my stuff even. I want to know each new stuff that I have that's not new obviously because it's stored in me, but new to my awareness. You know,
what's next, guys?
What's next? You know, because I want to deal with my stuff because you're out of your tantrum now. You just want to get through everything as fast as you can. When you're in a tantrum, you want to go through everything as slowly as possible.
Yeah.
And sort of complain about it on the way.
And complain about it.
Tell everyone, and, you know. Talk
And
about it.
many people who have heard divine truth for 20 years have been in a tantrum for about 18 of them. You know, because they just don't want to do it. But you're never going to experience the blessings of doing it if you don't want to do it. Which is appropriate, if you think about it. And so many people, you know, done what you did, Jen, you know, don't listen for 10 years, fundamentally, you know, don't have any interaction for 10 years, because it's sort of like, well, if I have the interaction, then my sins will be exposed. If my sins are exposed, then I just want to tantrum about them anyway, and that's painful, and so it's better that my sins are not exposed, so it's better that I don't listen. You know, that's the kind
It's
of...
all about ego, that.
Well, you could
It
say
has
it's
been
about,
for me. It's about keeping hold of the facade of what I think I want people to think of me,
true, it's
rather
that,
than
but there's
exposing
also
what's
many
really
other,
there.
It's also many other things, Jen. It's not just that. It's,
Okay.
Yeah, it's not true. Most people want to uphold their image of themselves, which is what you've certainly wanted to do. But there's also, you don't want to face pain. You don't want to go through pain, emotional pain. There's also, you don't have any faith about going through emotional pain. There's also, you don't want to accept God's authority. You don't want to say to yourself, well, God knows better for me than I know for me. You know, so there's a lot of parts to it, not just that one thing you've mentioned, but you'll come to see what is involved when you give up the tantrum. In the tantrum just saying, I just want to carry on, swear, carry on, curse, carry on, yell and scream, carry on, tap my foot, carry on, and hopefully somebody external will change because they realise that I'm just going to carry on for as long as possible until they do. And God's going, sorry, Jen, I'm not changing, you're going to. You know, that's what God's saying to you. And Jen's saying, no, God, you're going to. I'll show you. I'll show you how much of a fight I can put up and how much of a tantrum I can have. I can make your life miserable.
And God's going, yes, you do have a will of your own, Jen. Now you're learning. You're learning, you're using your will.
Badly.
It's going to end in pain, but you will know that it's you.
And, you know, when you realise that it has no effect on God whatsoever, your tantrum, and that He's not going to change any of His laws for Jen, and He's not going to do it for anyone else either, not just Jen, but He's not going to do these things, and you give up the tantrum, now you start to become a bit more sincere, you see. And that's going to, that's still ahead of you. That process still ahead, as it is ahead of most people who've heard divine truth for years and years and years.
Thank you
That's
so
why
much,
at the moment, you think back at the beginning when you started listening to divine truth, there were often 300 people coming along, right?
Yeah,
Listen.
lots.
Yeah. How many come along now?
35.
Who's in Australia, right?
Yeah, there's a bit of a waiting.
There's a bit of a waiting list. Mergen, 70. I think 75 and booked in or whatever. Yeah, before 15 years ago, there'd be 300 people booked in. Why is that? It's because sooner or later, most people hit the point where they really want to have the tantrum. And how long they have it just will depend on how long their string is. How long's a piece of string. It's going to go on for as long as they make it go on. Their tantrum go on. And you've got to get to a stage where you realise it didn't work.
It's just insane thinking that you can fight against God.
Yeah,
it's insane, but
it's not sensible thinking.
No.
Or, and it's not connected to any kind of real feeling.
Well, it is connected to a feeling. It's connected to the feeling that I am God. I have authority.
I have the right.
I have the right.
Oh.
I get to set the rules.
It's connected to the first sin that humans committed.
Oh.
That's why it's such a hard one to give up.
Why so many?
Because it's been so entrenched for, thousands of years.
Thank you so much, guys.
Good day. We were up to, everyone's back? Yeah. We're up to
my question was about feeling God's feeling about my desires and actions and how that relates to my conscience.
The way God shares truth with you is through your conscience.
There's no microphone.
Sorry. Fair and I both. Are we now talking? Yes, we are.
Yes.
So I asked Ulf. He said yes, Ulf. And Ulf asked the question, but that was recorded, wasn't it? Yeah, so the conscience is God's way of sharing truth with you, but not necessarily God's feelings with you. How you feel about God's feelings obviously means that you're going to have to be open to God's feelings, doesn't it? But you're right in the sense of saying that the way or the mechanism by which you feel God's feelings about what are truthful are via that conscious mechanism. But remember we said when we talked to you about the conscious mechanism that it is an emotional mechanism. So it requires you to be connected emotionally in order for it to work. If you're just connected intellectually, it is true that you can receive truths just with an intellectual connection, but you're not going to be emotionally connected to those truths, so your heart isn't going to be affected by the truth. So you could say when you're receiving information, which is intellectual in nature, you're not really receiving the truth, because one of the principles of God's truth is that it's emotional. So a lot of times when a person first hears divine truth, they're really just listening to divine truth, right? They're using the mechanism of their hearing, the sense of hearing, and that's going into their brain and getting processed one way or the other. But when it comes to them feeling about it, that's a different matter altogether. What happens for the majority of people is they hear divine truth, and then they start becoming aware they need to feel about it. That's when they go into their tantrum that we were just talking to Jen about. They have a big tantrum about having to feel about it. Usually that tantrum lasts, I don't know, usually a minimum of 10 to 15 years for the average person, unfortunately.
Not everybody.
Not everybody, but that's pretty common. And then they start to allow the feelings to come as a result, which means that their conscience now starts working. But of course, a lot of people on earth also choose the opposite course of action. And the opposite course of action is they're presented intellectually with the ideas and concepts of divine truth. They start to feel like there's going to have to be some feelings. And then they feel like, I don't want to do that, because that means there's going to be changes to my life that I don't want to do. I don't want to make these changes. And so it's better that I don't hear anymore. So this is why a lot of people who were listening like 10 or 15 years ago are not listening anymore, because they just don't want to listen anymore. If they listened more, then their conscience would ramp up. God would be able to share feelings with them more, and that would mean then they'd feel bad, and they don't want to feel bad, so they'd rather not listen at all. So the average person who hears divine truth can bear hearing it for anywhere up to about 3 years, and after that they usually either leave and don't listen anymore, or they go into a tantrum, which means they leave and don't listen anymore, but they're in a tantrum and they often recognise they are. And it's rare to find a person who doesn't have the tantrum, like doesn't either completely dismiss it altogether or go through a tantrum. That's a very rare thing. And I don't know if some people have very short tantrums as well, so, but others have very long tantrums. Like, we know some people still 2,000 years later in a tantrum, so some of them are very long tantrums. Some have short tantrums that last 6 months or a year or something like that. It's rare to have somebody who doesn't have a tantrum at all and who doesn't tune out altogether. Like, they're pretty rare people. To be sincere right up front, is a pretty hard thing to achieve. Yeah. So, the key in terms of your own progress, and this applies to everybody, of course, is to reduce the time period in the tantrum as much as possible, and to never go into complete denial. Right? Because complete denial means you're going to be faced with it in the spirit world probably, and in a worse condition than you currently are as well, if you go into complete denial. So there's plenty who we've known, even in this life now, who've gone in complete denial. And we know many of them are going to only listen again when they get into the spirit world. But they don't understand how hard it's going to be when they try to listen then either. And then there's others who've just been in a tantrum. We know they still feel attracted to divine truth to a degree, but they just don't want to have anything to do with us generally. or anything to do with the people who share it. And the main reason why that is because if you have time with the people who share it, then it means you're going to hear it, and if you hear it, then there's more potentiality that you'll be upset about what you hear, so you're better off not hearing it. And so the average person tries to sort of detune that way. And how long they stay in that place is anybody's guess as well, generally.
Well, it's a function of their free will choice.
Yeah, so it's really like, of course God would know, being omniscient, but we have no idea how long those periods last. But there were many of our friends in the first century who were, we met 50 years later in the spirit world, who were in that state for 50 years or so, and then eventually they came around. It just depends on your will. It always gets back to the will of the individual. And it's got nothing to do with your history, how damaged you are, how much trauma you've had. I've seen people with a lot of trauma and they've not had any resistance at all. In the first century we met some people, particularly some of Mary's friends, who had a lot of trauma, didn't have any resistance at all, and never had a point of resistance really, So, and then we met other people who hardly had any trauma at all and had huge resistance for long periods of time. So many of the males we meet are like that. Many of the men haven't had much trauma. They've caused trauma for others, but they haven't had much trauma of their own. And then they've stayed in that state for a long period of time because they want their addictions with others, don't want to listen. So there's no predicting and this is why Mary and I just have the feeling you just keep teaching because there's no predicting who's going to listen at any one point in time, and there's no predicting how long they're going to listen for, and there's no predicting whether they're going to eventually turn out to be sincere or not. Many times, sometimes you can feel up front there is a level of sincerity, but sometimes we've seen people with no sincerity up front become sincere due to some events that have happened to them over the course of their life that we've known them. You really can't predict. And that's why all of that stuff you got to just leave to God's knowledge, and it's not your own. All you can do is your best to share. Well then.
Until recently, I thought I believed in God, and then
Yep.
I found out I didn't.
Yep.
And then I've been working intellectually on discovering God.
Yep.
So what I'm asking now is the transition from intellectualizing it and feeling it.
Yep.
Is that my tantrum that because I've known about God for such a long time, is that just because I don't want it?
Well, getting to know God, I suppose that's a different subject of what we've been talking about, but let's just talk about it for a bit. You could say getting to know anybody. What's the process of getting to know anybody?
Understanding them and finding out about them and
How do you do that? So
asking.
let's say you
what
wanted to
has-
get to know me,
Yeah.
because you've never wanted to get to know me ever since I've known you. So let's say, at the moment you don't know me at all, right?
No, I don't.
And so even though you've known of me for, how long has it been now?
About 15 years.
15 years?
Yeah.
Okay. But you haven't wanted to get to know me yet. Right. How do you get to know me?
Observing you, asking questions.
So in other words, put me in a goldfish bowl.
I think you've
Observe me.
observed Jesus for about 15
Yeah.
years.
You've already done that, haven't you?
Yes.
And you haven't got to know me very well at all yet.
No.
So how do you get to know me?
Interact with you?
You're going to have to interact. That is true, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what do you do in the interaction? So observation doesn't help you a lot, does
No.
it? So this is what I'm saying is you said initially observation.
Yes.
Now, sure, you can observe somebody, but you can observe somebody for a long time and
Yeah.
still not really know much about them,
Yes.
can't you?
Yes.
And it is fundamentally like putting somebody in an aquarium and,
Yes.
you know,
Zoo or
studying them.
Yeah.
How's he acting there? Why is he doing that? How's he acting there? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's many people who do that with me. There's people who do that with me all the time.
Yeah.
There's even many spirits who do that with me for many years. I've had my own grandfather has done that with me in the spirit world for many years now. He's 70 years his lad he's done. So it's sort of like studying a person like that, but you still don't really get to know them. So to get to know them, you're going to have to interact. What are the interactions going to be?
I just had a thought.
So you come up and punch me in the nose, and that's going to help. Is it?
No.
What's that going to do?
Alienate me more.
So if you come up and attack me in one way or the other, what isn't that alienating of the other person? The other person, if they have any sense of love of themselves,
Yeah,
they're just not going to want to spend time with you, aren't they?
that's right.
That's right. So many people try that, try coming up, criticising me or whatever.
Yes.
You can't get to know me that way. So we're relating this to God, remember?
Yes.
So at the beginning, you can't put God in a goldfish bowl, can you?
Yes.
Right?
Or just like analyse.
Or analyse, because you really don't know what God feels
No.
or thinks about hardly anything at all. All you can do is observe his behaviour.
Yes.
So you've observed his behaviour since you were born.
Yes.
Did he ever respond to one of your addictions?
No.
No, so you know he doesn't do that.
No.
Did he ever, whenever you asked to be rescued from one of your own actions you've taken, did he ever do that?
No.
No, so you know he doesn't do that.
No.
In other words, you've got a whole list of all the things he doesn't do
Yeah.
already,
Yeah.
right? So many of us have that with people as well. They won't do this, they won't do that, they won't do this. We get to know what they won't do.
Yeah.
But that's really not getting to know them yet much either, is it?
No.
Because it's not helping us to understand why they won't do it. We just know they won't do it. So many of you have learned that God will not meet your addiction. But you don't know why. Because you still want him to.
Yes.
If you knew why, you wouldn't want him to anymore.
Right.
Right? So you don't know why. And you know that, every time you wanted to be rescued from your own behaviour, God never did that.
Yes.
You don't know why he didn't, because your mum and dad generally did sometimes
Yes.
rescue you, but he's not. So, but you don't know why he's not. So you don't know what goes on inside of God as to why he will not.
Yeah.
You just know he doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So observation does bring you something in that it brings you the ability to see what a person will or will not do.
Yeah.
But it doesn't tell you anything about why. Does it?
No.
It only tells you what they will do,
Yes.
right? But not why they will do it, right? So that's the first thing, is that you can observe, but observing is also a very dispassionate thing, isn't it, in a way? It's like me looking at Mary from a distance and going, what's she doing here? Why is she doing that there? I'm trying to work out why she's doing it, but I'm not asking her why.
We could just ask.
I could just ask,
Yeah.
right, but I don't want to ask because what? Why don't I want to ask? Why would I distance myself from asking her and then instead just watch? Why would I do that?
What was your question there?
Why would I just watch a person?
I-
Study it.
it was-
See your expression there. See how you twitched your mouth there.
Oh, now she's
Oh, now
laughing.
she's laughing. Now she's laughing.
I think it's I don't trust.
Just what though?
I don't trust.
There's a couple of things you don't trust.
I don't trust the reaction.
You don't trust that if you're in their life that they will continue acting the same manner. That's one thing you don't trust. In other words, see, when a person's in this world, when a person's observed, they generally act differently. When they know they're being observed.
Oh, okay.
So it's better, many of you have this sort of approach of, if I just have a, how would you do it, like a spy?
Yeah.
Covert analysis
Side-eye.
of their life,
Yeah.
and they don't know I am looking at it, then I'll have more information. That the average person believes that, right?
No.
Not true,
Yeah.
but the average person believes that. But also, what else don't you trust?
Myself.
Well, is it that?
I
Or is
don't
it-
know what's a guess.
If you do get involved with their life, what might happen?
I will have to change something.
No. Well,
Well, yes, I think you do.
well,
That shows
let's
God,
just
yeah.
let's just look at if I get involved with Mary's life,
Yeah.
what might happen? Let's say Mary has demands,
Yes.
and I get involved with her life. What might happen?
She might demand things from me.
And what would I feel about that? I don't like that. I don't want that. So many of us have this feeling with God. If I get involved with God, God will start demanding things of me
Yeah.
that I don't want to do. So I don't want to do that. I just observe. Right? Instead of being involved,
Yeah.
I just observe and try to work out what he's going to do before I actually have an interaction that will determine what he does.
Yeah.
Right? So we're frequently doing that. We're frequently not getting involved because we're worried
Yeah.
about what is going to be required of me by getting involved.
Yes.
Right.
And that can be in both directions.
Yep.
What if they have a demand of me, or say in the instance with God, what if God doesn't come to my party? You know, what if
When
I
I
have to
want
give
him
up
to.
something
Yeah.
to have that relationship?
So I want to be rescued and he doesn't do it.
Yeah. Yes.
What's going to happen then? Like I'll be angry with him.
Yes.
You know, like a lot of people don't want to be involved in any way when there's a potential emotion in themselves that might be triggered one way or the other.
Yeah, I did recognise in the past that I was quite angry with God.
Yeah.
I mean, what I thought was God. But, you know,
Well, you said earlier, didn't you, that you didn't know God at all.
well,
So you were angry with what you believed God would be,
yes,
which is
yes.
not the same as even being angry with God, is it really, in a way?
No,
It's just being angry about what you believe,
yes,
really,
yes,
about God, right?
Yes.
Which is not the same thing.
no,
And so you've come to recognise recently that, I haven't really known what God would do anyway,
yeah,
so how can I be angry with someone who wouldn't even know what they'd do anyway?
yeah.
So you've been angry with an image
Anyone but myself, of course.
of God, really,
Yes,
as well.
yeah,
But getting back to the question is, how do I get to know the person? So observing them, in observing them, there are certain things I can get to know, can't I?
yeah,
Like, you know, I can get to know that Mary's a pretty gorgeous girl and blah, 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 through observing,
Yeah.
right, I can.
yes,
But that doesn't mean I know her,
no,
does it? Like her heart, her feelings, her emotions. I can get to know her thoughts, can't I? How do I get to know her thoughts? Now, if Mary is expressive of her thoughts,
yes,
I can just get to know by being in her company, can't I?
Yes.
She expresses her thoughts and I go, oh, Mary thinks that way.
yes,
Okay? So I get to know her just by Mary expressing her thoughts. But let's say there's thoughts that she hasn't had the time to express, but I would like to know. So how do I get to know those thoughts? I would have to ask her questions, wouldn't I?
yes,
Like, Mary, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And then hopefully Mary would be willing to share with me what she thinks, and then I'd know what she thinks. So that's how I get to know her thoughts,
yeah,
right? But is that knowing someone? It's partially knowing someone, isn't it? If I know their thoughts.
yeah,
But so I can observe and I get to know what they do, and then I can get to know their thoughts by asking them questions about their thoughts. So you can do the same with God. God can share God's thoughts with you through the conscience.
yeah,
So you can ask God, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And what do you think about this? And, what do you think about, Tristan? What do you think about the grump on the side of the road, or, what do you think about having pets? So you can ask God questions, right? And receive God's thoughts. Yeah?
yeah. Is it the fact that I'm not great with asking questions also because I don't know myself very well? Or
Well,
no?
I think it's more that you don't want to know
The
the
other-
person you're asking questions of.
Oh, okay.
you know, the only reason why I would not ask you a question about your life is because I don't want to know you.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, we notice this a lot, Mary and I, when we're travelling. We ask questions all the time, as most of you already know. Because when to get to know you, we ask questions about your life. Like, so if you invite us around a dinner, it's not a conversation about, you know, the weather or something, is it? It's like, yeah, it's not a conversation about something external. It's a conversation about you. Many of you don't ask us any questions at all, but we ask you questions a lot, like questions about, because we want to get to know you. That's one way we get to know you, is by asking you questions and receiving your thoughts, and oftentimes
But also
we're receiving your feelings.
When
So
you express yourself, you also connect to feelings, and we feel
Yeah.
you.
We see
And
you
we
liven
come-
up at times, and
Come
then
to feel.
other times you no life in you, and we go, that's not, that's a thought, but it's not a feeling.
Yeah.
We can tell the difference, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you get to know their thoughts by asking questions.
Yes.
How do you get to know their feelings?
Well, you have to know how to feel yourself, don't you?
Well, no, you have to know how to feel them, don't you?
Well, can I feel them if I can't feel
Yes.
me?
Yes, you can.
Well, I don't think so myself. I disagree with Mary about that. If you don't feel all of your own feelings, you're not going to feel all of somebody else's either.
Yes.
That is true. But many of you say that you can't feel people's feelings when you can.
Yes.
Many of you do that as well.
It's
Right.
like you're in. Maureen, you're in an excuse land at the moment.
Yes.
Like,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's
You know that you can feel people's feelings,
Yes.
and you know you can ask them questions
and
about their
also,
thoughts
you can feel your feelings.
Yes.
when you choose to.
I've
Right.
seen you choose
When
to do that.
When
yeah.
I choose to, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not completely numb. It's very rare to find somebody who is.
Okay.
Maybe in the entire time I've been teaching Divine Truth, I might have met maybe 4 or 5 people who I felt were so shut down you could barely touch them in any way,
Yeah.
right? Maybe 4 or 5 of the hundreds of thousands of people I've talked to. So maybe a few minor points of the percentage of people are like that, but the average person has feelings about all sorts of things, right? And the reason why I'm saying this is because you ask, you get their thoughts, but as they express their thoughts, you can feel their feelings
Yes.
about their thoughts, right?
Yes.
And most people can do it.
Yes.
Now, of course, if you are shut down to all of your own feelings, or many of your own feelings, then you're not going to feel many of theirs, or you're going to misinterpret many of theirs.
Yes.
That's true, right? So you need to work your way through that. In other words, you need to learn how to have your own feelings completely in order to feel other people's feelings completely.
Yes.
That is also true.
That is true, but you
No, there's no but.
okay.
But go on, you were going to say.
No, that, yeah. Okay.
What were you going to say? Because I want to address all these buts, you see.
Yeah, sure. Just this binary idea that unless I'm feeling all of my feelings, then I can't feel anyone else's feelings. Is that true? Because
No.
I don't feel
It's
true.
selective. It's
Yeah.
all the feelings you allow yourself to feel about you, or all of your own feelings you allow yourself to have, you will also allow other people around you to have.
Yeah.
But all the feelings you don't want to have, you're also not going to allow anyone around you to have.
Yes.
Or you're not going to be able to feel it when they do have them.
Yes.
Or you're going to get angry when they do have them, right?
Yeah.
So to be completely open to everybody's feelings, you do have to be completely open to every feeling of your own.
Yes.
That is the truth. But the average person is in a state where they're gradually getting to that point, or gradually running away from that point.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just the degree of intensity you're getting there, or running away, as to what will determine as to what you actually feel. So there are times when I might express myself a certain way, and you feel that I'm, like, let's say I express myself firmly. You see me do that quite frequently, don't you?
Yes.
Particularly when a principle is involved.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how God is.
Yes.
Same firmness. Many of you think I'm angry when I'm firm, but I'm not. Right? So why do you think we're angry when somebody's firm? It's because in your past when somebody was firm with you, they were angry,
Yes.
and you haven't let go of that, and you haven't processed through that, and so you think that anybody who's firm is also angry.
Yes.
So there are times when you realise God's firm, and you think God's being angry with you, but actually God's just being firm. Right? So you've got to come to understand that there are times when the only way you're going to feel everything is that you feel everything of your own first. Right? That is true. But you can gradually get to feel more and more and more, can't you?
Yes.
And the more you allow yourself to feel, the more you'll feel from others.
Yes.
Isn't that true?
Yes.
Okay. So how do I get to know somebody? I have to ask them questions. I have to be open to their answers on an intellectual level, but I also have to be open to the feelings they have on an emotional level.
Yes.
And to do that, I need to have constant interaction with them, not just an occasional once a week thing or a once a month thing,
Right.
but daily thing,
Yes.
don't I?
Yes.
To get to know them. Like people are, and you think God's an infinite being, I'm going to need like daily,
Yes.
minutely, hourly, daily,
Yes.
and even then I'm not going to get to know everything because he's infinite and I'm finite, but at least I'll get to know more than I knew before,
Yes.
right? So that's how you get to know God. Now, why doesn't a person do that?
Yeah. Why don't you want to do that?
It's a good question, isn't it, as to why. Like, there's a fundamental way to get to know somebody, and the average one of us won't even get to know our neighbour, let alone God. Right? The average person doesn't even want to do this with their own partner, let alone God. The average person who's living with the person spending time with doesn't want to do it with the person they're living with, let alone God. So why wouldn't we want to? It's a good question, isn't it? Why wouldn't we want to do it? Tris?
Is it to do with the principle that when you start interacting with people, there is more opportunity given to feel things? Like there's, like you, as you interact with people, you're going to end up feeling more. So if you don't want to feel more, you're not going to interact with people.
That's right. You will want to restrict your interaction with people in order to not feel as much.
Especially people that you might think make you feel things you're already trying to get away from.
Yeah. So an example of that is when I started teaching many of you, like 18, 19 years ago, was the first time many of you met me, I used to come away from a 2-day group and I'd cry for 3 days. And the main reason why I cried for 3 days, because if I didn't cry for 3 days, I would never have taught you again. Because of the bad emotions coming from almost everybody in the whole room. I have a whole audience critical the whole time for 2 days straight. So you come home, cry about it, release the emotions. Now I'm ready to go back into the fray again. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm willing to interact again. Now, a way I could have controlled that was by not doing it anymore. Can you see that? I could have gone, no, stuff it. I'm not talking to any of you anymore. You're all bad. Treat me bad when I do. And everybody who meets me first time generally treats me bad. It's very rare that anybody who meets me for the first time treats me well, right? And so, if I reacted to that and without actually going away, feeling, and going through the process of forgiving everybody for their treatment of me, can you see? I would not want to have the next interaction. Now, if I don't have the next interaction, it's a way of preventing my emotions, isn't it? I could say, right, I'm not going to have the next interaction, and that's going to then mean that I don't have to feel all those tough emotions. Can you see?
Yeah. And that is actually an angry state. So the biggest thing I feel from you in your questions is that
the
anger. And you go into these cycles where you suddenly, I don't know anything, but it's really angry.
Yeah. And the average person, wants to distance themselves from their own emotions, their own painful emotions. And they will use whatever technique works best to distance themselves from their own emotions. So if one of the ways you can distance yourself from your own emotion is meeting all your addictions, that's what you'll do. If you can't meet your addictions, but instead you can withdraw, that's what you will do. right? If you can't withdraw or meet your addictions, then the average person gets angry. That's what you'll do, right? Because these are all ways to prevent yourself from having your own feelings, right? You ask the question though about how do I get to know God, and what I'm saying is you're going to have to ask God questions, listen to the responses, and feel God's feelings. That's how you get to, and observe what God does.
And I'm saying you don't want to do that at the moment because you're angry that God won't meet your demands. That's
and also,
why you have
not just that, it's like there's so many things you're angry
Yes.
about.
Yeah.
That you're angry that God won't meet your demands, but you're also angry there's no magical solution, and you're also angry that you have to go through some pain of your own feelings, and you're also angry that you're going to have to change your life in such a way that people might not like you, and you're also angry, you know, we could list all the things you're angry about, and it'd be quite a list, right? Now that's going to stop you from saying, I want to do this. Can you see it's going to stop you from being sincere about wanting to get to know God? Because fundamentally you're going, but if I know that, then I'll have to do that. And then if I know that, then I'll have to feel that. Then if I know that, I'll feel like I want to be angry rather than cry about that. So in the end of the day, you go, well, I don't want to get to know God at all. So what am I going to do? If I don't want to get to know God at all, what will I do? I'll do everything possible to not get to know God, rather than get to know God. Yeah. And that's including things like meet your own addictions all the time, get angry with anybody who doesn't, you know, live your private life in a way where you're not challenged too much, don't do any major changes in your life. You know, you'll do all of those things to avoid the relationship. Yep. And this is what the average person does. The average person does it with their partner, let alone God. Like the average person does, this is how the average person treats their own partner. Like they don't want to know what their partner feels or thinks about anything. They just want their partner to meet their addictions and have a magical time together, and let's have some sex in bed, and let's go off and have some fun, and you know, let's go and party, not have to deal with some hard things. The average person doesn't want to have to deal with the hard things. So the hard thing might be Mary has a different opinion than I do about having children, or she has a different opinion than I do about her parents, or she has a different opinion than I do about my parents, or she has a different opinion than I do about, you know, what to do, how do you live your life?
God.
And so each of us just ignore the other person's opinions as much as possible, and then we get along.
Except we don't really know each other.
Except we don't know each other, and we don't really get along. We're just ignoring each other's true state, right? And this is how the average person treats their relationship with God. Let's ignore God's feelings as much as possible. Let's ignore God's thoughts as much as possible. But let's ask God for love, because we want God's love. And it's the same with how they feel with their partner. Let's ignore their feelings as much as possible. Let's ignore their thoughts as much as possible. But I want you to love me. You follow?
Yes.
And I want you to love me the way I determined love to be, not the way is really love. I just, you know, just make me feel good about myself. Then you love me. You know, I feel like what do you see in a lot of romantic stories? It's like they make me feel so wonderful. They make me feel safe. I just feel completed by me, right? So if Mary does all that, then I'm done. I don't need to know what Mary thinks about anything else. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. That's all I needed. I don't need anything else from Mary. And so the average person, even in a relationship, doesn't know their partner at all for the same reason that they don't know anybody else really on earth, and that's because there's no real interest in the person, in what they desire or what they feel, what they know. You know, to know Mary, I'm going to have to know what she thinks, what she feels, what she desires, what she has faith in, what she doesn't have faith in, where her faith is corrupt, where her faith is real. What does she feel is true? What does she feel is false? I'm going to have to know all those things, aren't I? That's how I'm going to get to know God too.
And God is not, you know, hiding away somewhere, making it difficult for you to do these things. So that's why I'm drawing you back to why don't you want to? Because as soon as we want to, we can start to learn these things with God. We can start to have that relationship. But most of us are coming from a place where we really don't want that relationship, and it's dealing with why we don't want. What is our corrupt faith about that? What are the demands that we believe we're not going to get met, that we think we should get met, or whatever?
Most of us want to play it coy with God, you know.
Yeah. God's not coy. We are.
Yeah. we want to go, God got to work hard, prove that he's interested in me. That's how most of us feel.
Yeah.
Like many of you feel that. You laugh, but many of you feel it. That God should work harder to know, to be interested in you.
And
to prove to you that he's interested in you. Right? Yeah. And if you think about relationships, many of you feel that way with a relationship, is it? And quite often, many of you even bait the person you're in a relationship with, put them in a situation to measure whether they're going to do good or not on that, you know, trying hard. You know, they've got to try hard with you. If they're not trying hard with you, then it's not enough. You know? And these are the kinds of feelings we have towards God as well. Like, we want God to do all the work, not realising that God's ready and already done all the work God's going to do to get to know you. He's already done it. And he's already ready to know you. He already knows you. Knowing you is not God's problem. But having his love enter you is God's problem, in the sense that God can't, the love isn't going to flow into you with certain attitudes that you have. But God knows you already. Knowing you isn't the problem. So you know this feeling that many of you have of like, I want to be understood in a relationship. God already understands you. Right? He already knows you. He already gets you. He already gets all of your, he already knows all your life. He knows all your experiences. He knows all the feelings you have and all the thoughts you've had. And he knows, like I said in the first century, he counts every hair of your head. He knows how many there are. He knows you well enough, well, better than any other person ever will know you, including your own other half, until you're at one with them. God knows you better. But even then, God knows the complete soul better than the soul itself in a union state knows itself, because God knows your potentials that you don't know yet. Right? So even then, God knows things about you that you don't know. Right? God knows everything about you. So the problem with a relationship with God is not him knowing you, or understanding you, or getting you, or, you know, feeling compassion for you, or any of those things. The problem is whether you feel those things from God. Right? So it's not what God feels, it's whether you feel what God feels.
Yeah, I think what I've been is an illusion or a lie that I have wanted this. But from what you say just now and explaining it, it's evident that I haven't wanted it.
That's right, you haven't wanted it, and the same applies to most people in the room.
You've wanted something, a particular thing from God.
What have you wanted?
I suppose a saviour, I suppose. I don't.
A magical rescuer.
Yeah.
Yeah? What else?
What I imagine a mother and father, my image of what a mother and father
Correct.
should be like.
You want what you believe a loving mum or dad would do,
Yeah.
is what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not understanding that what you believe a loving mum or dad would do is not what God's version of love is.
No.
Yeah, for good reason actually. But your version of what mum and dad would do has given you what you now have,
Yeah.
interestingly enough. So you think about your own relationship with your mother and father. It's not good, is it? But that's what your version of love would do.
Yeah.
Right? Not what God would do. We expect God would do what our version of love is. And sometimes our version of love is the opposite of our parents, but even so, it's still tainted, isn't it? So sometimes you got things from your parents that you didn't want, and you like God never to give you those things. So sometimes you got from a parent, like occasionally they yelled at you or occasionally belted you around the backside or whatever. You know, you don't want that part of it. But then when they gave you things like approval and other things like that, you want that. And so what you do is you end up as an adult defining what love is, and you then want that from God. But that's not getting to know God.
And that's probably why I don't want to know God.
Well, you don't know, you don't want to know what God's version of love is,
Yeah.
and then come to understand what that is. Make sense?
Yeah.
To our own detriment, oftentimes. Because his version of love is the perfect love, isn't it?
Yeah.
Supposedly. Most of you don't. I say that, but I understand most of you don't believe it, so. Yeah. Oh.
Isn't it something to, like coming before God, or wanting to get to know God, that we shy away from because there's too much truth there? It's like it's so intense, and it's just better to avoid it.
Well, when you say it's intense, it's only intense because you're not used to the intensity, isn't it? It's only intense because it's beyond what you want the intensity to be.
Yeah, well, it's like you can't just get away with stuff.
Yeah, well, that's not to do with intensity now. That's to do with what's sin and what isn't sin, isn't it? Yeah, but you're right. You can't get away with stuff.
Yeah, and you can't really. It doesn't work putting on a facade.
No, because that's getting away with stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you just turn the? I can't hear too.
Yeah.
Is that round up the back coolish, or you still warm? Or?
Not really.
Warm.
You're warm back there, eh?
I'll just drop it down a little so I can hear you better. It's a bit noisy up here. Just drop it down one bar.
Maybe you turn that fan off at a reach, because that's
No, the fan pushes it down. It's better.
the people at it's the back that are really hot.
Well, yeah. By the time it gets up the back,
It is what it
we're
is.
just thankful we've got one at all.
Just now imagine it without it. It's luxurious back here. Truth, God, too much.
Yeah, so if you think about a number of comments you just made, Paul, it's like, yes, you're right that God doesn't allow you to get away with stuff. But isn't that good? Because if you got away with stuff, then you just keep on doing bad stuff.
For sure, it just takes a bit of effort to come before God in that space.
No, it doesn't.
No, not really. It's pretty easy.
It takes more effort to sin than it does to come towards God without sin.
But if you really want your sin, you might find it a bit confronting.
I guess that's it.
That's it. So even the way you state it is interesting, because it's sort of like saying, oh, it's really hard to be a loving person. No, it's not. It's not hard to be a loving person. God designed you in a six-sphere state from the beginning. That was your natural state, to be a loving person. Do you understand? So the natural state is the easiest state. To be a six-sphere loving person is the easiest thing you could do.
Yeah, and I guess this leads me into another question, and that is...
I haven't answered the last one.
Oh, sorry, go on. Sorry. No, and well, this has been on my mind because I have an attempt to be sincere, and
Well,
there's no such
you
thing.
can't attempt to be sincere.
Okay.
Well, because that's insincere.
That's insincere. You've got to develop sincerity, and when you have it, it's sincere. But if you try to be sincere, you are insincere.
That's facade.
Yeah, it's better off.
Go on, you were going to say.
Because this is the way I sort of experience it or feel it, is that if I have the feeling like I don't want to be in this addiction, and I want to love in this instance, well, I often would feel then the pain of not getting my addiction, and it's like wow, that's pretty full on pain. and
See, stop there. This is where you're going all wrong.
Yeah.
okay.
Not getting your addiction met is not full-on pain.
Or seeing the truth of myself.
That's not full-on pain either. Seeing the truth of yourself is a pleasure. Can you see your attitude is very much the opposite? Your attitude is getting out of addiction is hard. No, it's not. It's really easy.
Addiction
Being in an addiction is really hard.
makes life very
Makes
hard.
life very hard. Getting out of it's really easy. Feeling your pain is really easy.
So I understand that to a degree, because
No.
okay. Because does it just feel like I'm willpowering that pain?
No, you're not even willpowering it. You're basically convinced in your heart that if you do not meet an addiction, it's going to hurt like hell. You're convinced in your heart that meeting an addiction brings pleasure, not pain.
Yeah.
You're convinced in your heart that all of your pain has some other magical reason for existing other than your addictions. When actually the truth is all the pain you have is because of your addictions. But you're convinced that it's because of something else. Right? And this is the problem you have, is that you keep on thinking and feeling. Your faith is set saying, if I meet my addictions, I'll be happy. And I'm saying to you, Paul, fundamental issue here. If you meet your addictions, you will be unhappy. You are guaranteed unhappiness meeting your addictions.
And I feel I'm getting that to some degree.
No.
You don't feel anything.
No. You're completely convinced in your heart that meeting your addictions will bring you happiness.
Yeah, and the pain in quotations that you're describing when you make a decision intellectually, I don't want this addiction, that is really the pain of I want this addiction and I'm not getting it. That's not the...
That's the tantrum.
That's the
That's the
tantrum.
internal going against my real.
Yeah, your
and-
will is set saying, I want my addiction.
Yeah, and it's the good thing. It's the pleasurable thing. And remember, we know addictions are there to help us avoid existing pains, or because we have entitlements, one of the two. But that existing pain is not what you are connecting to when you're not meeting an addiction in this state that you're describing.
No.
You are just describing, oh, I really want my addiction and it hurts that I'm not getting it. Not, oh, I was trying to do all these things to avoid this pain, this other belief that I had inside of me. That's when you really don't want your addiction, that's what will start happening. You will feel the pain that
Maybe
is
an example would be.
driving the addiction. Oh gosh, I do that to you too, don't I? What is it exactly?
Well, let's look at your addiction to get things done fast
Yeah.
without much consideration of the environment or anything else. So what's driving that?
I want to feel a sense of worth, that I'm worthwhile, and
That you've accomplished something.
yes,
Yeah, so you fundamentally don't want to feel that you haven't accomplished something.
yes.
Can I also add, there's another feeling.
Don't get too...
Oh yeah, okay, I got it.
You got to
Just do the principle.
Example.
The simplicity.
Yeah, so what's the example?
No, that's it.
Right. So what's so your addiction is saying, this is how I get my worth. So to actually stop this addiction, what are you going to have to do?
To feel
That you have no worth.
that, yes, and be conscious of that when I work, so as I don't work in that addiction.
Well, you're probably working as soon as you start working, you're in that addiction probably.
Pretty much.
You might have to stop working
Yes.
for a while.
Yeah, and that often happens. I get something goes wrong and I get angry, and then
Oh, well, no, that's not the same thing. See, something goes wrong and you get angry. You're only stopping work because you're angry,
well,
not to feel your lack of worth.
yeah, but that can lead me to that.
No, it doesn't, because you're angry. Angry is going to keep you angry.
So to want to go under that.
There's no under that. There's no under that. Anger is a desire to avoid the thing. So there's no under it. There's no to get angry, you're going to have to go through anger completely, not get under it. You can't get under it. It's there because you wanted to avoid what's under it. You're not going to get under it. You understand? No? No? You're not understanding some fundamental principles about how to deal with things. This is what I feel. Right? You think you understand here, but you have no understanding here about how to actually deal with things. And this is something we notice a lot about people who have heard divine truth for a long time, is you think you understand it here, and there's no understanding here yet. Like, fundamental principle. Your anger is a choice to avoid what's under it. Right?
Yes.
So feel the choice.
If you feel the free will desire, I do not
I
want.
do not want to feel what's under it. See, what you're trying to do is you're trying to go, I want to feel what's under it.
Yes.
So get under the anger.
Yes.
Crap.
You
The
and
anger
mine-
is there because you don't want to feel what's under it.
Yeah, and you and mine.
So feel that. You don't want to go there.
Sorry.
Yeah, and so a lot of my pain and frustration is trying to willpower it, trying to jump to this place instead of being true to my real feelings that I don't want to. Going from I don't want to.
That's right.
Yeah.
You do not want to go through some specific feelings that are going to be, you think are going to be too hard to go through. But I'm saying to you, your addictions are harder. And you don't believe that. You believe your addictions are easier. But your addictions are going to bring you more pain, more suffering, longer pain. You're going to die in them if you're not careful. And you're going to be in the spirit world in the same place in your addictions, causing more pain and more suffering to yourself and others. And it's all happening because it's harder to live a life of addiction than it is to live a life free of it. But you think it's easier to live a life of addiction than live a life free of it.
Yeah.
That's one of your corrupt faiths.
Yes.
You feel that addictions are going to just a lot easier.
Yeah. And I'm unwilling to have that fight about, or that struggle to see the truth of myself. That's what I really want. I sort of want to
Not
believe
just that, you're unwilling to go through the feelings of what's driving your behaviour.
Yes.
This is what creates the anger. You're unwilling to go through the feelings.
Yeah.
Right? So the feelings are like deep sense of a lack of personal worth unless you accomplish something. In other words, feel like you have no worth unless you accomplish something. You also have no worth unless you're in a relationship with a woman. No worth. Right? You don't want to feel those two things. Those two things at the moment are driving almost every choice, every decision, every action you take. Those are driven by those two things. It's so uneconomical because every single action taken and every decision made driven by those two things is just causing you more pain and suffering in the longer run, and it will cause a longer run than a shorter one, by the way, because you keep engaging the addiction, believing the addiction is going to satisfy the sad emotion. It's just going to cause more pain and suffering, the addiction. It's harder to live in addiction than it is to live without them. But the average person doesn't believe that. They believe it's easier. But it's harder. It's harder because it's going to end up longer, harder, more difficult, more pain, more suffering, more rage, more resistance, and also no relationship with God. It's going to be harder. Makes sense, Paul?
And that's something we talked about in 2019, wasn't it? About measuring the pain. A lot of us don't measure the pain. We're just in a frenzy of I need the addiction, but we're not actually measuring how much pain living in this. It's very cyclical, and it's just accruing more pain.
Yeah, so we've seen you in the time we've known you. You've engaged 2 or 3 relationships. Every single one of them is with the same type of woman. It causes you the same type of pain. And in the end, you're not satisfied. You never are satisfied in the relationship. And yet you keep going back to the same kind of woman and getting the same kind of pain every single time. And well, I've seen you do that for 15 years. Right? Now, that's not going to continue. That's going to continue. It's not going to change unless you see that meeting your addiction is causing you pain. At the moment, you think it's causing you pleasure. And you think it's hard to give it up. It's not hard to give it up. It's harder to do it and bear the consequence of doing it. it's a lot harder. You end up, like, honestly, Paul, you could actually be with your soulmate by now if you had followed God's way 15 years ago. You know, generally, if a person is very, very sincere, they usually can reach a 4th or 5th sphere condition in 15 years, if they're very sincere. And if they're sincere and have reached that condition, they would definitely draw their soulmate to themselves in that time. Right? God designed it to work. Yep. So you could be with your soulmate by now, but not with the addictions you currently have. Yeah. And God's saying, I can't let you be with your soulmate, really. You know, in a way, when I say let, it's not like God's going, I'm going to make your life hard. It's like it's not good for Paul to meet his soulmate in his current condition, because he's just going to cause a terrible havoc in that relationship if he does. Right? But Paul's convinced that his addictions are going to lead him there. And until that conviction changes, you're not going to change. Right? So you are frequently convinced, Paul, that you understand what you need to do, but what I see is that you do not want to feel hard emotion. You do not want to feel them. You want to do everything you possibly can to avoid a hard emotion. And yet the hard emotions are going to be the most economical way to deal with the problem. You have, over the time of the last 15 years, I've seen you in many hard emotions, most of which have been caused by your own addiction.
And at the moment, like going through these I don't want tos, it sounds like.
Well, not really. You can say I don't want to for the next 100 years and you won't want to at the end of it. So what's going to change that?
You need to face that you don't want to.
Yeah.
And why?
But that's the important point is why. You say you don't want to, but you're not looking at the real reasons why. The real reasons are you've got some hard emotions to deal with about worth that you do not want to go through. Right? You just don't want to go through them. If you chose to go through them, you could be over them in a year or two. And they wouldn't define the rest of your life anymore. Right? But you don't want to go through them. You don't want to have the gut-wrenching sadness that's going to come with them. You don't want to go through them, so instead you'd rather get angry or have your addictions. And all you're doing at the moment is meeting your addiction until it hurts too much, and then just getting angry because your addiction didn't work. And then you go back to another relationship, meet the addiction until it hurts too much, and then you just, after that, leave the relationship and get angry because it didn't work. And then you go to another relationship, meet the addiction until it hurts too much, and then go back to the anger when it didn't work. And this is the cycle you're in. Meeting the addiction till it hurts too much for Paul to handle, and then going back to anger because meeting the addiction didn't get the result you wanted. Right? Now that is not going to change anything. What's going to change something is, like Mary said, ask, why do I want this addiction so much? What's the purpose of this addiction? You start to look at more deeply at whether it's actually bringing you the benefits you believe it is. That's the kind of thing you need to look at. Make sense? Oh, yeah. And what I'm saying to you applies to most people who have heard divine truth. There's this very strong idea of like, I need to feel my feelings, so I need to feel my anger. And I'm going, well, if your anger is just a creation in order to avoid the truth, which is of what your addiction is, then why bother feeling your anger? Like, it's not going to get you anywhere. You're just going to be angry the rest of your life and still not know anything about yourself. You're going to have to get under it by not trying to dive under it, but actually feeling the rage that's in you and why it's there. It's there to help you overcome some other feeling that you don't want to have. That's why it's there. The anger is there to stop you from feeling the other feeling you don't want to feel. That's why it's there. Right? So what's the feelings you don't want to feel? And your conviction about those feelings is that they're too hard to feel. It's too hard to go there. It's bad to go there. And none of that is true. They're all just false beliefs that you want to hold on to support the addiction continuing. But at some point, Paul's got to say, well, I've tried this. In the last 15 years, you've tried it 3 times in a row from what I've observed, and it hasn't worked so far. How many more times does Paul need to try the same thing until Paul realises what he's doing doesn't work? That's the weird question, isn't it? Because you could do it another 20 times. Or this could be your last time, and you start looking at what is the reason for the rage and the reason for the addiction. Because the reason for the rage is the same reason for the addiction. There is something driving the need for the addiction, and then when the addiction doesn't get met, the rage. And that thing is not the thing, you're not addressing that emotionally, you're not feeling that emotionally. Make sense?
Does it make sense?
I'm a little bit confused because I told you once that I had an experience with my daughter when I was going to see her.
Yeah.
That I felt like I wasn't going to put stuff on her anymore.
Yep.
And I had that conviction.
Yep.
Living myself, and it was painful, but it was
Yep.
really good. It was really beneficial.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of place where I've been going back to emotionally, and then like at times feeling like quite bad about myself, and really sort of that feels appropriate, and it feels.
Well, Paul, you do it your way and see how you go.
So that's my question. Yeah.
I think that's your way, but you know, I don't think it's going to get you much direction.
Yeah.
It's you want to tell yourself that you deal with things without actually going through the hard emotion. What you believe currently is a hard emotion is just a dribble. Do you understand what I mean?
I think so.
It's just a dribble.
Yeah.
Versus a
Yes.
Yeah. When you continually sort of making that decision, like I'm not going to meet my addiction in this situation.
It's an intellectual
totally
kind of thing. You have a dribble of emotion. That's not the same as really like engaging in a process where you come to terms with your will, desire to engage the addiction, and why. And feeling why.
Not just that, it's not the same as even just having the real emotion. Like,
you can't
the thing that's going to heal you is the real emotion being had. Whenever you use your mind to say, I'm not going to do that anymore, and then you do not do it anymore, you've not had the emotion.
Yeah.
You've had a change of heart in the sense that you don't want to do it anymore, but often I see you doing the exact thing with women that you say you're not doing to your daughter anymore.
Yeah.
And so that hasn't changed you in that regard. You're still doing the same thing to your daughter, by the way,
Yes.
as what you say or claim that you're not doing.
Well, I only didn't do it for that one weekend, and then resorted back just to being the same.
So doesn't that teach you? It's not economical. It didn't work.
It didn't work.
No, it's not nasty.
But you want to keep saying, but I don't understand, and so this is the issue that I have with these discussions with you, is that you want to keep saying that you don't understand, but I'm quite plain what I'm saying to you is that what you're doing is not going to work, and you're quite plain telling me that it is going to one day. And that's why I said just earlier, well then you just keep doing how you're currently going, and we'll see in 20 years' time whether it's worked or not. But is that how you want to play it, given the fact that the last 15 years has demonstrated it hasn't? It really gets down to your stubbornness now, doesn't it? Like, at the end of the day. Your conviction that you're right versus somebody else saying, no, Paul, you're wrong.
Well,
Does that make sense?
well, I know I'm not doing it right because I'm not getting far. But
Well, no, you know you're not getting far, but you think you're doing it right. So what's the reason why you're not getting far according to you?
well, I think that because I'm trying to willpower it and not be honest with myself and go through the struggle of I don't really want to do this because of the pain or because of the reasons why I don't really want to.
Right, but how has that helped you?
Well, I'm saying that's not what I've been doing. That's what I'm going to take away from today. Yeah.
This is what I'm saying
Yes.
to you. If you look at it honestly, everything I've said to you up until today, for the last 15 years, you fundamentally, and this is what happens with many people listening to Divine Truth, they fundamentally believe that I am substantially wrong with what I'm teaching. No, I'm honest about this. Most of you think this way. You think, and many men in particular think this, by the way, that I am substantially don't know what I'm talking about, and that you know better the way to do it. And I'm saying to you, well, is your way for the last 15 years worked for you? And if it hasn't worked for you, then maybe your way isn't as good as you think, right? And maybe you should consider some other way, and particularly consider that the person teaching you Divine Truth is telling you your way doesn't work. Many of you do not have the humility to even accept somebody telling you that. Many of you are so convinced that your way will work, as long as you do more of it somehow, or change it a bit here, or change it a bit there, eventually it will work. And I'm saying, no, it's never going to work. And the average person goes, yes, it is. It's my way. Of course it will work eventually. You know? It's substantially a lack of humility to listen to somebody who's demonstrated to you how it actually works. Right? And most people don't want to see that. Most of you have such condescension towards how to actually do it that you don't even want to do it. Like when I say condescension, you are literally feeling a state of how stupid is it to do that? Like what AJ is suggesting, what Jesus is suggesting, how stupid is his suggestions? So you'll listen to me about Divine Truth, you'll listen to me about the spirit world, you listen to me about how God feels about you, you listen to me about all these different things, but you will not listen to me about you. About you. And yet the very thing you need to listen to me about is you. Because without you coming to know about you, you will not be able to practice anything to do with God's truth ever in your entire life, in your whole future. Unless you listen to somebody about you in terms of how you are compared to the laws that we're living by, that God created you to live by. Right? And many of you are so stubborn, like incredibly stubborn about listening to the very person who's teaching you, because you want to believe that your interpretation of what I'm teaching you is more accurate than what I'm saying. Right? And it's pretty off, to be honest. It's pretty off. And this is why Mary and I sort of feel like, man, when is this sincerity going to change? Right, where you actually are humble enough to accept that the person who's taught you Divine Truth actually does know your condition and actually does know how to get you out of it. When are you going to have that trust of your teacher? Now, at some point, and it might not be me, see, in the future, if you do not listen to me about this now, you'll pass, and in your passing, you will meet up with other people who want to help you, and they will eventually say exactly the same thing that I'm saying to you. And you will go, but I've heard all that before.
Oh, when did I hear that?
Oh, I heard that from that Jesus character, right? And I didn't agree with him then, and I don't agree with you now. And you'll end up in the same place where you just won't listen to people for years on end until the pain and suffering of all of the not listening catches up with you, and then you might listen. But you can change that now. You don't have to wait until then. You've got opportunities now, right? And this is what I notice is that many people are doing. Many people are going, oh, but he doesn't really get me. He doesn't really understand me. He doesn't really understand how sincere I am. I'm so sincere. And he doesn't really get it, you know. I'm sure he knows a lot about God and a lot about truth, but he doesn't understand me at all, is what the average one of you believe. And it's not true. But you can believe it if you want to.
So this is things which I tell myself about to avoid emotion and to stay in my addiction and stuff like that.
You know, the amount of times I have heard from people say to me and email me things like, you know, you're not at one with God yet, so what do you know really? Right? That's what they say to me. I go, well, the fact that I've been teaching you divine truth for free for 18 years or 20 years or what it is now, so 2004, 20 years, and publicly should at least demonstrate that I know what I'm talking about, maybe, and I'm consistent with it all the entire time. I haven't changed the fundamental teachings in any way whatsoever. And so, and the fact is that the fact that I can do it myself would tend to indicate that perhaps, even though I'm not yet at one with God again or whatever, that I perhaps still know more than you do about it. Right? And if I do, and you trusted that, and the people who do trust that progress. The people who don't trust that never progress. Right? And that's why I said in the first century, if you can't accept me, you're not going to accept my Father who sent me. Right? If you can't accept me, you're not going to accept my Father who sent me. And this is a fact. Like, until you recognise the people who can help you, and until you stop believing that your own assessment is the more accurate of the two assessments, substantially no change will be made.
The more you progress, the more you realise your own assessment of things is just worthless, because it's driven by sin. And even as you're getting out of sin, you're like, well, God's assessment is far more accurate. Even as I'm getting out of sin, God's opinion is far more accurate and not clouded by my own sinful desires, my own addictions, my own just pet things, you know. You see the gift that it is when somebody can tell you, hey, this thing right here that you cherish is the thing that's causing you pain. Like, that is a massive gift.
Yeah. It's the people who trust that progress the fastest on earth and in the spirit world. And so at some point, you've got to get beyond your own opinion of yourself and start to be able to accept God's opinion of you. And the majority of people on earth maintain their own opinion of themselves until they pass. And this is why very few people, by the time I passed in the first century, there were 500 people who would even listen. You know? And that was after 3 years of me being at one with God, talking to tens of thousands of people. There were 500 people who would even listen. Why is that? It's because the average person believes their own assessment of everything is the most accurate, including their own assessment of themselves. That's why. If you can see beyond that, you will progress much more rapidly. You can't see where you're at without external assistance. In the Paget messages, we said that very clearly. If you'll read in the Paget messages, if you read them carefully, you will see that we said, nobody progresses without external assistance, from truth coming from an outside source. Where you are is this level of water. For more truth to enter you, the level of water has to be higher than the level of water you're in, doesn't it? Right? For water to flow in that direction towards yourself, you have to be lower than where the water's coming from. Right? So if you believe yourself to be higher than where the truth is coming from, God, or from people who have got a connection with God, and you believe your version of truth is higher, this water, which you believe is here, how is it going to enter you when you think you're here? It's not going to touch you. Not going to touch you. And so that's the fundamental principle. Nothing can flow higher than its source. And if the source is you, then you are where you currently are, and therefore there is no higher source than you. And so how are you going to get into a higher place when there's no higher source than you?
So it's an arrogant attitude.
It is. Extremely so.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's the main reason that causes most people not to progress. Right? And until you can be humble enough to go, I need some help and assistance from outside of myself, and I need to listen to that and apply it, that is the only way I'm going to progress. Then you start going, oh, my opinions of myself don't matter so much. What matters more is that I correctly assess that the person who I'm trying to get assistance from is in a condition where I can get assistance from them. Because if they're in a person in a worse place than you, there's not much point doing that. But if they're in a better place than you, then there's point to it. And God is in the best place, right? Infinitely better. So obviously the primary source should be God. And then listen to all of God's truths, listen to God's principles. Like, whether you agree with them or not, who cares? What matters is that you listen to them and you work out why you don't agree. Right? Because all of God's principles are true because they're God's. And all of yours could be true or false, but mostly false probably, given the fact that you're not with God. Right? So listen to God. And if you can't listen to God, at least find somebody who is listening to God that you can listen to them. Do you know what I mean? You're going to have to work out one way or other who that is, but at least do that. Right? But if you're just listening to yourself all the time, you'll convince yourself of everything.
Yeah, and you're just on a merry-go-round, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's just everything's the same.
And this is
Every year's
avoidance of emotion.
Yeah, every year's going to be the same. You're going to have the same experiences every year, no change every year, same experiences every year, because substantially the only way to grow is for you to absorb a truth external from yourself that's higher than the truth you already have. That's the only way you can grow. There is no other way to grow. You have to accept the truth higher than yourself from an external source to grow. There's no other way to grow. Yeah, if you just listen to yourself, you will never grow. Until you have to get truth from an outside source. There is no way you'll ever grow without it. And this is something we said quite clearly in the Paget messages, but something that almost everybody doesn't honour. You know, the amount of emails I get from young men in particular telling me how wrong I am on everything, it's like, I don't know, probably 15 to 20 a week on the average. There were times when I would try to respond, and go, what's the point of responding to somebody who already thinks they know more than I do? Right? I'm teaching divine truth. I'm the first person who ever taught divine truth on this planet. And if you think you know more than me about it, well, good luck to you. I would like to know it if you did, but what I observe is all these people who think they know more, they don't demonstrate a life that they know more. So, right? But it's not about what I know. What it's about is the fact that if you honour your teacher, you will at least honour his assessment of where you're at. Wouldn't you? At least that. Like if you went to a university and you went to a 4-year course in university, let's say it was engineering, and every time you go to a course there's a grade you get, and your engineer professor is going, right, yes, you've learnt structural engineering design of trusses. Yes, you've learnt that, but you only got a B because you didn't get everything right. And you say, how dare you give me a B? I deserve an A++++, because I reckon I got everything right. And he says to you, look, you got all these answers wrong. No, I didn't. I got them right. This is what many of you are like with me. No, I didn't. I'm getting it right. You're teaching. I understand what you're teaching. I said, no, you don't. No, yes, I do. I get it. And I said, no, you don't. Not yet. And you say, yes, I do. And I go, well, what can I do then? It's like you being at a university lecturer and the lecturer is saying you didn't get it, you got a B or a C, and you're saying you got an A. What are you going to do with that? Like, he gave you a C. What are you going to do?
I'm not going to get you to build my bridge, that's for sure.
And this is what we do to avoid emotion and avoid actually doing that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we avoid. You could say you do it to avoid your own pain and your own painful emotion. couldn't you? You could also say you do it to avoid, like I know talking to me, you don't get many of your addictions met, right? I know that. So you do it, you ignore me so that you get addictions met from somewhere else, and that you're never confronted with what those addictions are. You know, that's one way you do it too, one reason why you do it too. Another reason is because you want to believe that you know better than anyone around you. And it's just a substantial thing that many men in particular on the planet want to believe. And so you want to do it for that reason. You want to do it also because change is required when you start realising things. And many of you don't want to change your life. You think you're quite happy with your life. I can tell you, most of you are extremely unhappy and yet you believe you're happy. And so you do it because you don't want change. Many of you do it because you don't want to get attacked. You know, you see how much I get attacked, and it's a lot, right? We get attacked a lot. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes where we get attacked all the time. And you don't want to be attacked as much as we are, right? So you do it for that reason. You don't like confrontation. You do it for that reason. And you know that if you uphold God's truth in certain circumstances, there will be confrontation. And and you don't want confrontation, so you don't uphold the truth. So you do it for that reason. Many of you do it because you like the addictive relationships you're in, because you don't want to change them. You don't want to have to leave them. You don't want the confrontation of having to be alone for a while, working out some things. So instead you'd prefer to stay in a relationship even though it's not really working. And also out of harmony with God's principles. Many of you are scared of your family. You know, you're scared of what they think of you and what they feel about you and what they're going to do when you actually practice God's truth. There are so many justifications the average person has for not doing it. But none of them are valid. They're just fears that you have that are causing a false reality in your life. Like, what we have on earth here is an illusion because it's been created by people. Like the very land we live on is in an illusion at the moment because it was created and destroyed by people. You know, there's people who eat meat and there's people who want all these things from the land and want to destroy the land and they don't care about the native parts of the land at all. And they've created this land that looks relatively nice, let's say, but it's not what God created. It's a complete different reality. And most of us are content to stay in it, unfortunately. And that's why there's the fifth sphere and the fourth sphere and the third sphere and the second sphere and the first sphere and then the hells of the first sphere, because each of us had a different contentment of a different reality that are not God's version of what's love. And we're happy to live in them. In fact, we're the most content when we live in them, unfortunately. That's why they exist. They were created by our very soul in order to be the most comfortable with where we are, you know. And what we have here on earth is what most people on earth are the most comfortable with.
And sort of what I think is that I'm confused about the way and not sure about the next step and that, and I think that's more avoidance of really going there.
Yeah. And in fact, a lot of times when you say you're confused, you're really projecting at me saying, I haven't taught you well enough for you to understand yet what the way is. And I get that a lot from men, you know, particularly men, where they're constantly saying to me, I don't really get it, I think what you're explaining is not really true, and so forth. And it's not true. The truth is, I do know the way, and I have taught it relatively well, considering
I think you've
the resistance.
fairly comprehensively
Right.
covered it from many angles. The same content.
The same, but the average person still wants to believe that they don't really get it, rather than actually putting into practice the things they do get.
Just even the first things. The first things most
like,
people don't want to do.
let's say tell the truth every single moment. Let's try that one. The average person doesn't want to do that. They don't. The average person wants to withhold the truth whenever they can.
And instead feel like I don't get it, or there's other reasons why not to go there.
Yeah, or, you know, why don't I tell my truth to the family, my friends? Why don't I say the truth to the government? Why don't I, you know, why don't I do all those things? It's all too hard. It's not, but it's quite clear what saying the truth means. It's not like, the truth is truth, honesty, openness, transparency. That's what you be with all people, right? So it's quite clear what it is, but the average person goes, but I don't want to do that. If I do that, there'll be changes I don't like in my life, you know? Not understanding that those changes will be good, you know, because we'd have no faith that they're good. Because the world has no faith it's good. We have no faith it's good, and so we just don't do it. Yeah. And this is the trouble, is that we end up in these states where we're convincing ourselves that the problem is our understanding, or the problem is our, you know, that it's too hard, or the problem, it's not hard, that God designed you to be in a sixth-sphere state. He actually created you in that state right from the beginning. He designed that to be the easiest state of your life. Anything less than that is a harder state to live in. He designed it for you. It's like, so you convincing yourself that it's too hard is just an illusion you're convincing yourself of, right? Because the reality is God made it six-sphere state is where you're meant to be. But the average one of us wants to tell ourselves that, you know, the whole reason why we've got pain and suffering is not our fault. It's not our fault. It's God's fault. Or if God exists at all, it's God's fault if God exists. And if God doesn't exist, it's some magical thing that's happened in the universe, like, you know, nature is fundamentally angry with us. This is what the average person who doesn't believe in God believes. You know, this is a dangerous world we live in. This is the average thing the average person would like to believe. If they don't believe in God. If they believe in God, they believe God's punishing them. You know, God's causing trouble for them. You know, not understanding we cause our own. Yeah. And fundamentally, our arrogance is one of the major causes of our own trouble. Which, if you think about it, is the very first injury, as I mentioned to Jen earlier. The very first injury being that I wish to believe that I am God. I know best. I know how to live my life better than anybody else, including God. That's fundamentally the reason why we have the problems we have. So you've heard Jesus just rave on for a half an hour about that. It's a huge thing, Paul, because what I see when we travel a lot, Mary and I, as we're travelling around, we've been seeing the average person comes to one of our seminars in such extreme arrogance that they're unable to even grasp the fundamental principles of God's truth. Because of the extreme arrogance they hold about them, their own knowledge and their own place, their own state. Just extremely arrogant. And you can understand why the average person does not have a relationship with God. You know? And all we can do is be really firm with you all about it. All we can do is just say, you are not getting what we're saying to you. That's all. What else can we say? Like, we're like university lecturers are saying, you don't get the engineering thing I just taught you. You know? That's all we can do. What else can we do? If we can't convince you that you don't get it, then are you going to change? While you believe you do get it when you don't. Like, it's just not going to work, right?
And you'll end up blaming God's truth, saying that it doesn't work, thinking that you're doing it.
And sort of thinking that I'm doing it my way, God's way.
Yeah.
Sort of.
But my way.
But my flavour of God's way.
That's right.
My unique alteration of God's way that should work.
Yeah.
And thinking that I'm a bit lost in it, but that's more because I don't really want to go at it, I think.
Yeah. It's Like, God's truth, a child can understand. So, you know, I have actually taught children, you know, particularly in the first century, we had to, like, when I first met, like, Luke, he was like 6 years old, and he heard divine truth and loved it. Like, you know, a child can grasp it if they want to. If a person doesn't want to grasp it, you can spank him. Literally 20 years. And they still won't grasp it. Right? And this is why, if you notice what we did in the Paget messages, whenever we went to a person who didn't want to listen, how long did we speak? You know, one of them who later listened to one of his friends rather than myself, he said, Jesus just turned away and went off because I couldn't understand what he was saying to me. Right? What else can you do? If the person believes themselves to be right and believes themselves to know when they don't, all you can say is you don't know and I've got to go. And with him, with this man, Nathan Plummer, I think his name was, he, you know, eventually listened to his friend Ned on Earth, you know, Paget on Earth. And then he made some changes, but he wouldn't listen to me. He said actually that I can't even recognise that he's Jesus. I don't know what anybody sees. That's what he said. Which is what the average one of you say about me, right? Yeah. Can't even recognise. Right? And you won't be able to until you've received some of God's love and you've received some of God's truth and you've actually, in a humble state where you can see what you don't know, as well as see that most of what you think you know, you don't really know, you know? Make sense? Yeah. Linda, you want
So, I don't know if it's relevant, but just you and your identity, and you just mentioned it then, and I thought, how many people in this room do you actually believe you being Jesus? Is that something that affects you, even though they call you Jesus? Like, do they truly feel in their heart that you are?
Yeah, maybe 2 or 3.
And how does that feel for you to...
It doesn't worry me, I know who I am. What concerns me more is that you don't understand that even though you've been listening to me for many, many, many years, many of you are still not listening. Like, I don't understand why you come along and listen to somebody and then don't do what he suggests. Like, if you went to a doctor, like you go to a doctor and you say to the doctor, look, I've got this problem with my leg, I see this sort of thing happening where I've got this thing travelling up my leg, you know, inside my leg, you know, this thing, like what appears to be a growth, it's probably an infection, right, coming up my leg, and you take it to the doctor and he says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some antibiotics, right, and you're going to have to take those antibiotics for 14 days, and you've got to notice what's happening to your leg, and if it goes away, then we know we're on the right track, right? And you say to him, I think you're an idiot.
But you go back next week.
Yeah. I think you're an idiot. I think I'm not going to do that. Or you say to him, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then you go away and go, I think he's an idiot. Right? And so you don't do it. And then the growth is up to here by the time you come back 2 weeks later. Right? And you're saying, doctor, it's getting worse. And he says, did you take your medicine? And you say, no. And he's going, well, of course it got worse. You didn't take your medicine, right? You didn't deal with the problem, at least the way he suggested to. And then, let's say, he said, look, you take medicine, it will get better. And you go away and say, I still think he's an idiot. No, I don't want to take the medicine. Now, if you're not careful, he's going to have to amputate your leg, the way you're going, right? In other words, each time you avoid a truthful reality in your own life, the next time is going to be harder on you every time you avoid something, right? So what I notice is a person comes with problems, listens to divine truth generally, coming with problems, and suggestions are made. Most people avoid those suggestions because they believe their own assessment is much more accurate, right? So they avoid the reality. What happens the next time is the reality is worse, right? And worse and worse, until the point that your whole soul's reality is so bad that you get so much pain and suffering, you can barely even hear a person talk to you about how to fix it, right? But it could have all been stopped many years prior just by listening and applying the remedy. And this is what I notice about many people listening to divine truth, is that the majority of people are not willing to listen and apply the remedy, and they use my condition or my, claim of being Jesus as the reason to not apply it. It's not a very good thing to do.
And also it's a little bit mystifying that people keep coming back. They are very arrogant and they use those things as an excuse, but then they keep coming back. So
yeah, so with you, Paul, you keep coming back to listen to what I say, but you never apply what I say. And then so it's not going to benefit you because it's never getting applied. Now, what I would do if I was you is I'd look quite strongly at why it's not getting applied. There's a lot of fear you have about all sorts of things not happening the way you want them to happen if you apply it. Right? You're afraid that if you don't work like you work, then you won't get the worth you get. You're afraid that if you don't enter the relationships you enter, that eventually you'll have no relationship and that'll be the end of it, and you won't have any sex or life or joy or romance in your life. The opposite is actually true, but you don't believe that at this stage, right? And this is where we hold on to our own concept so strongly that we can't accept what's being said to us. Yeah.
And you're not the only one in the room in that state.
Not at all. It's like you're the only one who's willing to talk about it with me.
Yeah.
Which is better than not talking about it, right? Yeah. But the reality is the average person who listens doesn't really listen. They just hear. The words are going in their ears, but even then, many of you know that you can hardly even hear them. Don't you find that? Like you listen to a recording that you made and you go, I didn't hear him say that, or that, or that, or that, or that. This is how we are. We're so shut down internally to truth that we can barely even hear it, let alone listen and apply it, right? And it's good for us to know that about ourselves. Because if you know that about yourself, you can do something about it. So what you'll notice is Mary and I are going to get firmer and firmer and firmer with you about these things, right? Because what we notice happening is that people say they want to hear, but not apply. And in the end, it's pointless you spending your time hearing but not applying.
We're wasting everybody's time, aren't we?
Yeah. Mary and I might as well go have a nice quiet day to ourselves in our bedroom than with you.
And not with you there.
Than have a bunch of people here, 35 people in our house not listening. Hearing but not listening. Yeah. Hearing but not doing. Now, I'm not saying all of you are in that state, because some of you are doing, right? And those of you who are doing are receiving some of the benefits of doing. Yeah? And of course, as you progress more and more, that will increase more and more too. So not all of you are not in the same state, so it's not right for all of you to believe you are. But it's very important to see that many of you do have this attitude that you know better than the person who's teaching you. Now, if you arrive in the spirit world with that attitude, you will never progress beyond the point you arrive, if you believe that. Because it's only by listening to the truth outside of yourself that you will progress beyond the point where you arrive. That's a logical fact. It's logical as well as a fact. And this is very important to understand, very important to grasp, very important for each of you to face. Your own conception of yourself is sometimes the biggest problem you face. You know, I've sat down with many, many people, even in the last 20 years, trying to explain to them how their own conception of themselves is completely false. And I've barely had any single person listen. I've had so many discussions, many of them recorded actually, and yet nobody listened. Right? Until you come to terms with the truth of how you are in comparison with the truth that's external, progress can't be made. And what I mean by that is that, you know, there's this beautiful external truth, but until you make it yours, progress cannot be made. Until it's in your heart, progress cannot be made. And it's so important to see that. So yes, Linda, people use my identity as an excuse to not listen. People use my claimed identity as a justification for, you know, thinking that I'm an idiot whenever I say something to them personally about their condition. But interestingly enough, many of them come along regularly to some kind of presentation, but when I say something to them personally about their own condition, it's completely the opposite in that, you know, they'll listen to the external truths, but they won't listen about how they can get it inside of themselves. They just won't listen about it. Now, even Mary has had the same difficulty, I must point out.
Totally.
Where it's been like fight the fight, fight the fight, fight the fight, fight, justify. You don't see me right. You don't see the correct or whatever.
My own, this is why I'm so passionate with you guys about your own image of yourself, how important it is to give that up, because, oh man, I was so kind of certain of my image of myself, and it was damaging me, it was hurting me, this idea of who I thought I was, and keeping me from truth, but gee, I fought for it.
Mm-hmm.
I fought for it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, with me, I've had to come to terms with my own image of myself too, but the difference is between myself and yourselves is I don't fight for it anywhere near the amount that you guys do. You guys just are so intense with your fight about it. With me, it's sort of like, okay, that's pretty hard to handle, I'll go and cry about that. And then it's sort of done. But with you guys, it's like, let's have a good like, bash up about it first for years and years and years, and then I'll have a cry and then it's done. And that's how it is for many of you, right?
You come to regret that so much, you know, the time wasted in just pointless fight for illusion, fighting for untruth.
Yeah. And the real way to progress is to reduce the desire to fight as much as possible. Like, you know, that's, get over your desire to fight as much as you possibly can. Like, of course there's been times when I want to fight, but like, you know, I fight for a maybe. Like the longest I think I've fought for is about a month. And it hurt so much that I decided I'm not doing it again. Like, you know, why do it?
Can I just add to your point? For a lot of you, I want to say, be honest that you're in the fight. Some of you are just kidding yourselves that you are doing this or that you want to do it, but you're fighting. And then get over your desire to fight. But acknowledge first that you've got it. Like some of you, it's like trying to beat your head against a brick wall to even convince you that you're fighting, and then get over it. Yeah.
Fighting doesn't get you anything but a longer sentence.
And waste.
That's true on earth,
It's true on earth.
in the spirit world, isn't it? Like, if you imagine you went to the judge and you got up in court and instead of saying, yes, I committed the crime, you said, no, I didn't do it, no, I didn't do it.
I'm
And
actually
there's all
an
this
excellent
evidence being presented, no, I didn't do that either, didn't do that either, no. And then you start yelling and screaming, how bad are you, blah, 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 and you reckon you're going to get a shorter sentence that way?
Five more.
So it's the same principle when it comes to God's laws. You know, the more you fight them, the longer the sentence is. It doesn't make a lot of logical sense. And it's all just for the sake of upholding an image of yourself that wasn't real anyway. Like, what's the point of that?
Sometimes it feels hard to be in the world.
Sorry, put it.
Sometimes it feels hard to be in the world.
Yeah?
Like, I know you taught.
Well, the world makes it hard, Linda. I don't know if it's that hard to be in the world when you're actually in a state where you love. It's not that hard then. I don't find it hard to be in the world. I think the world tried to make my life hard, you know, many times. That often happens. You know, in our last trip it happened almost everywhere we went. You know, we've somebody tried to make your life hard, but it doesn't mean that it is hard.
It sort of feels like this is the only real thing. Like,
yeah, but it's not hard. See, it's hard to live the illusion. And I know in a world that's living in illusion, you living in truth seems hard. But it's actually, you look at everyone in the world, do they look like they're doing it easy? You know, coming up, there's going to probably, in the next 5 years, there's probably going to be wars, right?
Yeah.
You can see it
More
coming.
wars.
You can see it building.
There's already wars.
There's already wars, but I mean world wars. Like, it's pretty predictable, given you look at every world leader now is really, really darkly motivated, selfish, looking for power, glory, like it's inevitable that the world's going to enter this state, right? Right. So just because the world enters that state, does it mean you have to? Like, I don't think so.
And really what you're expressing, Linda, is just grief that everyone, that just needs, is ant-emotions, as we call it, that need to come out of you about some
Fitting in with the world.
fitting in or feeling lonely or something. Because when you're really in a state of love and truth, there's a strength there, you know.
Not only that, you know, there's millions of celestial spirits now. You'll have good company wherever you walk, if you have their company. You know, there was a time in my own progress in this life where I felt like I was alone. That's true. But after I got through those emotions, I realised I got a lot of friends, and they're good company. And so nowadays, we spend time with them every single day, you know, for hours at a time, in their good company. Like, a lot of what you worry about is not as real as you think it is.
Which is not to say you shouldn't have your grief.
I still need to have your grief, but the reason why you have grief is because the things you're grieving aren't actually real. If they were real, you'd be happy rather than grieving.
what do you mean not real? Like,
They're not real. They're not like
they really that.
they happen to you. Things happen to you, right?
Yeah.
But they weren't real in the sense that they weren't what love is. They weren't what truth was. They were all error.
So you're grieving being alone in the world, but you already were alone. You know, you feel like being more truthful.
And by the way, you're not alone, ever.
I don't feel alone. I prefer to be alone, but that's just shutting down.
Yeah, that's just shutting down. But even then, it's like, you prefer to be alone, but even then you're not alone.
No.
Yeah, you're trying to avoid it. It's not alone, is it? Being the feeling of being unloved by others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps,
Yeah.
But that's not true either. You're loved by God, and you're loved by all these our celestial spirits. Whenever they come around you, they'll love you for sure. You know, there's also other spirits who are not even celestial spirits that love you too. right? But it's just, there's not a lot of people on earth who love you, because most people on earth have a corrupt view of love, and so therefore you're not going to feel loved. Yeah?
But if you prevented your change in order to avoid that feeling, then then those people didn't love you anyway, because they would love you changing. You know, I can't. Can you explain it? You sort of, a lot of times we make excuses for not progressing or not being truthful and not being ourselves in the world, because we think, oh, then I'll get attacked and no one will love me. But the reality is they already didn't love you. They didn't want you to be yourself. If they're going to react like that when you do step into more truthfulness, then they already didn't love you.
The person who truly loves you will be happy when you step into more truthfulness, won't they?
Well, the one that, yeah. Yeah.
One who truly loves you.
Somebody and he says, I love you, but I don't feel it at all. But that's just me looking at it.
You shut down your emotions, you're not going to feel much, right?
No, I don't. I haven't for a long time, so.
Yeah, but so the answer to that one is to open up your emotions more, because then you might be able to feel what they actually feel. And if somebody does say they love you and you actually don't feel any love from them, then you'll know there wasn't any love there. But at the moment, you don't know the difference because you shut yourself down. Yeah? They're all. This is what I mean. Is that it's all an illusion in the sense that you're creating your own state that's saying this is real, but it's not real. Like many of you believe your pain is real, but it's not real. It's transient. It's not permanent. You can release it and it'll be gone. So it's not real. It's a temporary state. Right? It's not real in the sense that it's not permanent. It's not going to remain forever. Right? But a lot of your life at the moment is not real either. You're living an illusion. So a lot of your friends are not your friends because you've never been honest with them. And once you're honest with them, you'll find out who your friends are.
Yeah.
You know? You're only going to find out who your friends are when you're honest with everybody. Until then, you won't find out who your friends are. So I found out when I started being honest, at the time that I started being honest, I found out I had no friends. On earth, I had no friends. And then I started to think I had no friends at all. But there was a whole heap of spirit people that I eventually connected to who were my friends, who were very happy with me in being in a state of more truth. Right? Again, it was all an illusion. It was me just thinking there was no people who wanted truth. When there was plenty of people who wanted truth, I just couldn't see them. You know? This is what I mean is that when I talk about a lot of your emotions not being real, a lot of you go, but they are real, they are real, they are real. I want them to stay real, I want them to stay real. They're not real, that you just need to go through them and when they're gone, you go, why do I even worry about that for? Like, all I had to do was feel it and it was gone. You know, but we can stay in that place where we hold on to them for years and years and centuries. I've seen millennia. You know, and you can use the excuse, oh, nobody loves me and nobody cares about me. There's people in the hells right now who've been there for 1,000 years who think nobody loves them. They're willing to live in that illusion that nobody loves them for 1,000 years. Just because their opinion is more important than other people's. The same fundamental problem I was talking about before. Just because you want to hold on to the idea that your sadness is going to be never ending, and your sadness is just as bad as it could be, and your sadness is just your shame and your guilt and everything else that's so bad, it's so hard, you're never going to be able to cope with it. None of that is true. God designed you to cope with it, deal with it, feel it, end it. He designed you to work through all these things, right? But the average person on earth goes, not possible. And in your illusion that it's not possible, you create a different illusory life, which says these things are not possible. You know, so it's like what I see, you imagine yourself in a show, like, imagine you're in a TV show, and the TV show is you're living a life and yet it's not real. We watched this show the other day called Ascension. And these guys were meant to be in the middle of space, right? But actually it worked out that they were still on Earth, right? But they all thought they were in space.
We were in the spoiler alert.
Sorry about that. Not that any of you wanted to waste your time watching it, but it's just an interesting concept, because that's what I see most people on Earth doing. They believe themselves having a real life, when it's a whole life that they're living as a real life is actually a complete lie and illusion. It's not real. Right? This is how most of us are on Earth, living this life on Earth, not facing reality. It's far better to face reality than live that. Yeah. Sorry about the plot spoil there.
Still work. It still work.
Was it worth our time?
Yeah, probably not.
But it's an interesting concept, because that's the reality that most of us are living right now. We think we're living our real life, and what we're living is a reality that we've constructed to meet our illusions. That's what we're living.
And then when some people have that illusion broken outside of their own free will choices, somebody else breaks the illusion for them, or some circumstance does. People think it's the end of their world,
and it is.
And it is, in a good way. But most people think it's the worst thing that could possibly happen.
Yeah. Have any of you seen The Matrix, the movie The Matrix? Yeah, most of you. You know, it's the red pill, blue pill thing, isn't it? The illusory life was they were all in reality in cocoons in the movie, with pipes into them, and being fed information through their brain synapses, right, to create those reality that wasn't actually real. And that's fundamentally what we're doing to ourselves by living out of harmony with the law, out of harmony with God's law. We're creating an illusory life that we think is real and we believe is real, and we're living it as if it's real, but it's not real. And it's only truth that solves that problem. That comes from outside of yourself. That's the only thing that solves that problem. Many of you are busting, so we better let you have the lead.
It's 10 to 4. 10 to 5. Jesus really did go on.
Yeah, I did. We won't be doing any channeling, obviously. And is this going to be the end of our...
Well, that's why I said the time.
So I'll just sit down for another 5 minutes. So,
hold it in.
For the sake of the video. That's probably the end of our discussion today. Yeah. But I'd just like you to think about what we talked about there. Try to face the things that you think are real, and like all of your sadness is not real. All of it is not real. It's created by illusions, lies. So unless you're going to have to feel it and work your way through it, but you'll end up at the end of it looking back on it and going, "Wow, I don't feel that anymore." So it wasn't real. It's just a temporary state. It's just not a permanent thing, right? And it's the same with all of the emotions you will have that are negative at the moment. All of them will end up, you look back on them and you go, "Wow, why did I even stay in that place for such a long time? All I needed to do was feel it, and it was gone, and it no longer was real for my life anymore." And yet, while I hold on to it, and while I try to keep it within me and fight for it and defend it and have an argument and a bitter, many of you to the bitter end, like end of your life, you're going to have this argument. While I do that, I'm thinking it's all real. I'm fighting for this reality that, for some strange reason, and what it really boils down to a lot of times is that I want to believe that my reality is the reality. In other words, I want to believe that I'm God and I create reality. which is the very first injury of the very first human couple. I want to create an alter reality that I now live in and agree with. So just think about how you're doing that with your life. Every sadness you have, every anger you have, all of them, none of them are real in it. None of them will remain with you if you progress. They're all transient, they'll all go away, so why not make them go away sooner rather than fighting for them? Yeah? So if you can take that with you and have a feel about that, maybe next week we just talk about that a bit. Yeah? What were your feelings about that? Someone telling you that all the sadness that you have, that you're going to have to feel, will end up not being as real as you think it is. For a lot of us, we want to hold on to it as if it's real because we've got all this nostalgia about it. Again, that's what defines me as a person. You know, keeping hold of all of these things, all of these experiences that I had that weren't even real, holding on to them is what made me me, and it's not.
If I let them go, how will there ever be justice for what happened?
Yeah. How can I ever make people pay for what they did to me? You know? It's just all... It is so far removed from reality that it's like, sixth sphere is reality, let's say. First sphere, where we're living, not reality. It's a reality we've created, but it doesn't have to be the reality. Right? And it's only real as long as you want to hold on to it and make it real. That's how long it will be real for you. So there's people I know, like I've said, thousands of years in the hells of the spirit world because that's what they want to believe is real. They want that reality. And many of you sort of think, well, why would they want that? But that's what you're doing, so why do you want that? Is the real question. You know? So that's the question. That's your homework, eh? Why do you want your own reality? So I want to know next week from you why you want to hold on to your own reality rather than accept God's. Is that right?
Yeah. It's a bunch of excuses.
You'll come up with a bunch of excuses, that's true. But it's important for you to know what your own excuses are, and it's important for you to also work out whether those excuses are worth the price. You know, like at some point you've got to balance it all up and say, is it worth me staying in this illusory state? Or is it better if I go to the truth? You know? You remember in the Matrix there was that guy who wanted to go back to the illusory state. Yeah? Is that the kind of person you are? Because that's substantially what many choose, isn't it? They listen to divine truth for a while and they hear it and they're quite enthusiastic about hearing it, and then they love hearing it for a while, and then all of a sudden they get to the point where it's now triggering them in some emotional way, and now what do they want? I've had people say to me, there's been many people who have emailed us and talked to us, said, I wished I'd never met you ever in my whole life. I wished I'd never heard the truth, because now that I've heard it, I can't unhear it, but I want to go back to the way I was living before, and I can't. They're so angry with us about it, right? Is that the kind of person you want to be? Is really the question, isn't it?
Some of you have been that person.
Some of you have tried that person for 10 years or more. Like, how long is it going to just be a cycle after cycle of that person? So, yeah, ask yourself the question, why do I want my own illusions? What do I believe I'm gaining, living in that state? All right, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Sorry about So I don't know how it's going to work out.
We're here for it, babe.
Yeah.
That's right.
I had one in Ireland as well where I just went off and
I love that one.
yeah, I just went off and half an hour later I came back and said, what happened there?
You were so passionate. Oh, like I said, I thought you were going to take off.
Yeah. But it's like, the more and more I progress, the more I see how much everybody wants to hold on to the illusion, you know, the false beliefs. And it's really important just to be able to give them up. You want to give them up. You want to get to the stage inside of yourself where somebody presents you with the truth and you just give up your false belief there and then.
Wow.
That would be the best, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because you're going to progress very fast if you can do that.
Imagine the extra energy. You spend so much energy fighting for the fault.
Like, what I see is many of you want a battle, like you want a full-on world war about your feelings, you know, like first, about how bad they are and how hard they are and how difficult they are.
And everyone should know.
Nobody should have to feel what I have to feel. And, you know, you're in full-on, like,
Battle mode.
world war battle nuclear mode, like, trying to fight, you know, and why? All you're trying to do is fight God. And it's not going to work out that well. As it should already have been proven to you in the past, right? Yeah, it's not going to work out that well, but we for some reason believe it's going to work out. It's going to work out. I know.
It's a special case for me. It'll work for me.
I know better than God. It's going to work out.
Stupid.
And it's just so ludicrous that we even contemplate doing it. And yet, you know, it's going to take people on earth going, I have to give up my own illusions about myself first. And if I can do that and face the truth about myself, now I have the opportunity of God's truth entering my heart and therefore changing my whole life, right? But if I can't give up this illusion that I have about myself, how am I ever going to give up? Like my own injuries and my own emotions that are preventing me from being my true self, my true nature. It's just going to be impossible. Like, I'd love for many of you, like within a year or two's time, that you've given up so many of your illusions that you can accept truths being presented, and you can do it in such a way that if you need to cry, you just cry there and then, you know, and then once that's done, that's it, you've done, and you're now able to accept those truths, you know. That would be give up the battle, you know. Fundamentally, there's going to be a world war because each of you are in a world war already with your own selves. You know, you're allowing the sin to dominate your life.
And calling it righteous.
And calling it righteous. Yeah.
That's how world wars happen.
That's right. Yeah. All right, guys.
Love you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.